Hey everyone. Welcome back for the fourth part of What If Naruto Was Sasuke's Brother? As always, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, especially with all the restrictions YouTube places on my type of content. As always, the full story is already out over there for you guys along with about 50 other different stories you can enjoy. Also feel free to send me any messages over there if you have any questions or even if you just want to chat. Link to all of that will be in the description. Anyways, everyone, enjoy the video. Chapter 10. The wind that swept through Sunagakure's cavernous streets was different now. The frantic edge of panic from the initial assault had been replaced by a low, humming thrum of grim determination. The scent of blood and scorched sand still lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the morning's battle, but it was now mingled with the sharp, metallic smell of weapons being sharpened and the determined shouts of squad leaders organizing their platoons. From the highest balcony of the Kazekage's tower, Naruto and Gaara watched the village transform into a fortress. Below them, the main sand army, a river of tan flak jackets, flowed toward the newly repaired gates, their ranks marshaled by the scarred, steady presence of Baki. They were not preparing to defend the walls, they were preparing to march out and meet the main body of the Iwagakure army head-on. "It is a strange thing," Gaara said, his voice a low rasp that was no longer lost in the wind but carried by it. "To see them so willing to fight for me. For the village." Naruto leaned against the warm stone railing, his white coat a stark contrast to the desert landscape. "They're not just fighting for you, Gaara. They're fighting with you. There's a difference." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Gaara's lips. The 2 years since the Konoha Crush invasion had changed him. The work Naruto had done on his seal had granted him the peace of sleep, and with that peace had come clarity. The hate-filled whispers of Shukaku were now just a sullen grumble in the back of his mind, a manageable anger rather than an overwhelming one. He was still a weapon, but he was now the one holding the hilt. "Your presence here has given them hope," Gaara admitted, his teal eyes fixed on the horizon, where the dust of the retreating Iwa forces was a faint, hazy smudge. "But it has also escalated the stakes." Naruto's relaxed posture didn't change, but his blue eyes sharpened. "Aniki is sending them, isn't he? His other Jinchuriki." "Han of the 5 tails and Roshi of the 4 tails," Gaara confirmed, his expression hardening. "Our scouts have confirmed their chakra signatures. They are leading the next wave. Veterans of the last war. They have controlled their Baijuu for decades. They are not like us, Naruto. They are weapons who have forgotten they were ever men." The unspoken challenge hung in the air between them. Baki and the main army would engage the rank-and-file Iwa shinobi. But the battle of monsters, the clash that would decide the fate of this entire front, would be theirs alone. "So, 2 old men against the 2 new kids on the block," Naruto mused, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Sounds like they're in for a rough retirement. Do not underestimate them, Kit," Kurama's voice rumbled in the back of his mind, a low thrum of ancient power. "Kokuo and Son Goku are not like the rabid tanuki. They are proud. And their vessels are experienced. This will not be a simple brawl." Naruto's grin didn't falter. "Who said anything about simple?" He turned to Gaara, his expression shifting from confident bravado to the sharp focus of a commander. "What's the terrain like 10 miles out? Where their main army is likely to make camp?" "Flat," Gaara replied instantly, his mind already shifting to strategy. "Open desert. A few rocky outcroppings, but nothing significant. It is a killing field. Ideal for my sand, and for their army's advance. And a terrible place for a 4-way monster mash," Naruto concluded. "We can't fight them there. Not with both our armies clashing around us. We need to isolate them." He looked at Gaara, a plan already forming behind his Mangekyo eyes. "How good are you at landscaping?" A few hours later, as the twin sons of the desert began their descent, casting long shadows across the sand, the 2 young Kage stood once more before the village gates. The main sand army had already marched out, a grim, silent force disappearing into the twilight. Sunagakure was quiet now, a village holding its collective breath. Temari and Kankuro approached them, their faces etched with a worry they couldn't quite conceal. "Are you sure about this?" Kankuro asked, adjusting the puppet on his back. "Taking on 2 veteran Jinchuriki by yourselves. It's insane." "It is necessary," Gaara stated, his voice calm and absolute. "The army's duty is to the army. Ours is to the monsters. Just try not to level the entire desert, you too," Temari said, her attempt at a light-hearted tone falling flat. She looked at Naruto, her teal eyes lingering. "And you? Try to come back in one piece this time. You still owe me, remember?" Naruto just gave her a wink, a flash of the old, unpredictable boy she'd met in the exams. "Don't worry. I'm a man of my word." With that, he and Gaara turned and walked out into the vast, empty desert. They moved in a comfortable silence, two lone figures against an endless sea of sand. The weight of the coming battle was a palpable thing, but it was a burden made lighter by the simple fact that neither of them was carrying it alone. They stopped 5 miles from the village. The last rays of sunlight bled across the horizon, painting the dunes in hues of orange and deep purple. "This is the place," Gaara said. "Looks a little boring," Naruto commented, kicking at the sand. "You sure you can give it the right touch?" Gaara didn't answer with words. He closed his eyes and placed his palms flat on the desert floor. The sand around them began to stir, not with the violence of his earlier tsunami, but with a deep, resonant hum, as if the entire desert was waking from a long slumber. Slowly, majestically, the landscape began to change. The flat, open desert buckled and rose. 4 colossal pillars of sandstone, each 1 hundreds of feet tall, erupted from the ground, forming a massive, square arena. The ground within the pillars churned, rising into a complex maze of high walls, deep pits, and narrow canyons, all crafted from compressed, hardened sand. Naruto watched, his eyes wide with awe, as Gaara sculpted the battlefield with the casual artistry of a master potter. He wasn't just moving sand, he was creating a death trap, a labyrinth designed to confuse, separate, and conquer. When it was finished, Gaara was panting slightly, the effort of such large-scale creation a visible drain on his reserves. But before them stood a monument to his power, a custom-made arena for a battle of gods. "Not bad," Naruto said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "A bit dramatic, but I like it." He unsealed a dozen of his tri-pronged kunai, tossing them until they were scattered across the highest points of the newly formed canyons, glinting in the moonlight. His own pieces were now on the board. He looked at Gaara, his blue eyes sharp and serious in the growing darkness. "They'll be here by dawn. Get some rest. You did the heavy lifting." Gaara nodded, settling into a meditative stance. "And you?" Naruto grinned, a feral, dangerous light in his eyes as he looked out at the silent, empty desert. "Me? I'm going to go say hello." With a silent, golden flash, he vanished, leaving Gaara alone in the center of their newly made coliseum, the stage now perfectly set for the war's most pivotal battle. The world resolved in a gut-wrenching lurch of displaced space. One moment, Naruto was standing in the cool, moonlit silence of the sand coliseum. The next, he was miles deep in the open desert, the air thick with the oppressive heat of the night. He landed in a low crouch atop a lonely, wind-blasted rock outcropping, a silent phantom under the desert stars. He closed his eyes, drawing a slow, steadying breath. He didn't need his sight. He reached out, not with his own chakra, but with the wild, untamed senses of the kitsune realm. He let the song of the world, the hum of nature energy, wash over him. Then, he listened past it, searching for the discordant notes, the sour tang of malice. He found it almost instantly. It was a sea of it. A vast, rolling tide of killing intent and negative emotion from the north. Thousands of individual points of light, the chakra signatures of the Iwagakure army. But at the very crest of that wave were 2 signatures that burned with a furious, ancient intensity. They were bonfires in a field of candles, radiating a power that was both familiar and alien. Son Goku and Kokuo, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, a low growl of grudging respect. "The Monkey King and the 5 Tails. They have none of my grace, of course, but they are beasts of pride. Their vessels have had decades to learn their rhythms. This will not be like fighting the broken Tanuki, Kit. They are complete." "Good," Naruto thought back, a predatory grin touching his lips. "I was hoping for a challenge." He opened his eyes, the red pigmentation of Fox Sage Mode already bleeding around them, a stark, intimidating mask. He could see them now, a dark line moving across the desert floor, a river of men flowing towards Sunagakure. At their head, he could just make out the 2 figures. One was a giant, his body clad in heavy, crimson armor that steamed with a constant, low hiss. The other was an older man with a wild mane of red hair, walking with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had not needed to hurry in a very long time. Han and Roshi. "All right, time for introductions," Naruto murmured to himself. He didn't intend to fight them here. That would be suicide. This was not a battle, it was a statement. A declaration of the rules of engagement. He took one of his tri-pronged kunai and held it up, the moonlight glinting off the Hiraishin seal. He spun it on his finger, his sage senses calculating the distance, the wind speed, the arc of the throw. He wasn't just aiming for a spot, he was aiming for a precise moment in time. With a flick of his wrist, he threw the kunai. It sailed through the night air, a silent, silver blur on a perfect trajectory to land 50 feet in front of the two veteran Jinchuriki. It was still in the air when he vanished. Han and Roshi stopped. Their decades of experience screamed at them a fraction of a second before it happened. The air itself seemed to ripple, to bend. The space before them tore open. FSHHH. In a silent, brilliant flash of gold, Naruto appeared, crouched low to the ground, his hand resting on the kunai that had just embedded itself in the sand. He rose slowly, his white coat whipping in the wind he had created, the red markings around his sage eyes glowing with an eerie light. The entire Iwagakure vanguard, hundreds of elite shinobi, ground to a halt. They stared, their professional bravado momentarily shattered by the sheer impossibility of his arrival. Han's massive, steam-powered armor hissed, the pressure valves releasing a cloud of hot vapor. The Hiraishin. He growled, his voice a deep baritone that was muffled by his helm. Roshi's eyes, narrowed and sharp, took in the boy's appearance. So, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. This is Konoha's little monster. You have the scent of the nine tails all over you, brat. Naruto ignored him. His gaze swept past the two Jinchuriki and settled on the army behind them. He gave them a wide, charming, and utterly terrifying grin. Evening, gentlemen, his voice rang out, clear and calm in the sudden desert silence. Sorry to interrupt your stroll. My friend and I have prepared a special arena for your two champions here. He jerked a thumb back in the direction of Sunagakure. The rest of you, however, are not invited. I'd advise you to turn back. Roshi let out a harsh, cackling laugh. You would advise us? You are one boy, facing an army and two Jinchuriki who have been walking this earth longer than your village has existed. You are either a fool, or you are insane. A little bit of both, Naruto admitted cheerfully. He brought his hands together, a single clone appearing at his side. He didn't take his eyes off the two veterans. But you're wrong about one thing. The real Naruto held out his hand, and the clone placed its own over his. In an instant, a swirling, violent sphere of brilliant blue chakra, larger and more condensed than any he had ever made before, roared to life between their palms. It was a perfect, stabilized Rasengan, humming with a power that made the sand at his feet vibrate. I'm not one boy, Naruto said, his grin vanishing, replaced by a look of cold, absolute power. I'm a natural disaster. He didn't charge. He didn't aim for Han or Roshi. He drew his arm back and, with a roar, hurled the Rasengan. It wasn't a clumsy throw, it was a guided missile, a nearly invisible thread of wind chakra connecting it to his hand. It flew over the heads of the two stunned Jinchuriki and plunged directly into the tightly packed center of the Iwagakure army's front ranks. The impact was not an explosion. It was an annihilation. A silent, grinding vortex of chakra erupted, expanding outwards. It didn't burn or blast, it simply erased everything it touched, carving a perfect, 50-foot sphere of oblivion out of the center of the army. When it dissipated, a massive, glassy crater and a stunned, screaming silence were all that remained. Naruto didn't wait to admire his handiwork. The arena is 5 miles south, he called out over his shoulder as he took a step back. Be there by dawn. If you're not too scared, that is. In another silent, golden flash, he was gone. Han and Roshi stood frozen, the wind whipping at their clothes, the horrified screams of their own soldiers echoing from the crater behind them. They stared at the empty space where the boy had been, their decades of experience, their pride, their power, all of it momentarily eclipsed by the sheer, audacious, and terrifying reality of what they had just witnessed. The yellow flash of Konoha had just declared war on them. And he had done it with a smile. The impact of Han and Roshi's landing shook the very foundations of the Sand Colosseum. They didn't land with the grace of leaf shinobi, they landed like meteors, cracking the compressed sand beneath their feet, their combined presence a suffocating wave of heat and pressure. For a long, silent moment, the four Jinchuriki simply stared at each other across the 100 yards of open arena floor, the rising sun casting their long, distorted shadows behind them. The battle had not yet begun, but the war of wills was already raging. A grand stage, Roshi's gravelly voice broke the silence, his arms still clasped behind his back. A faint, molten glow emanated from the corner of his eyes. You went to a great deal of trouble for your own graves. I am almost impressed. We believe in being good hosts, Naruto called back, his voice deceptively light. The red sage markings around his eyes had already appeared, a stark, intimidating contrast to his calm smile. It's only polite to prepare a proper burial site for our guests. Han's steam armor let out a low, steady hiss, the only sound he made. He shifted his weight, the movement of a mountain settling, and lowered himself into a powerful, wide-legged taijutsu stance. He was a being of pure, kinetic potential, a coiled spring of steam and steel. Enough talk, Gaara stated, his voice a low rasp that was as cold and sharp as the desert night. A thin, swirling shield of sand had already begun to orbit his body, a silent, deadly promise. Let us begin. The world exploded. There was no signal, no further declaration. The four figures vanished from their starting positions in a simultaneous, breathtaking burst of speed. The battle lines were drawn instantly, as if by some unspoken, primal agreement. Naruto shot forward, a golden flash of Hiraishin. He appeared directly behind Roshi, a Rasengan already roaring to life in his hand. Too slow, old man. But Roshi was a veteran of 100 impossible battles. He didn't even turn. A thick, bubbling wall of molten rock erupted from the ground behind him, meeting the Rasengan with a sizzling, explosive hiss. The sheer heat of the lava destabilized the sphere of chakra, causing it to detonate prematurely in a wave of concussive force. Naruto was thrown back, using the Hiraishin to flash to one of his kunai on a canyon wall before the steam scalded him. A child's trick. Roshi snarled, turning his molten gaze to Naruto. You are not the first yellow flash I have faced. And you will not be the last I have buried. Before he could press his attack, the ground beneath him liquefied into a grasping vortex of sand. Gaara, his hands outstretched, was already on the offensive, a massive, clawed hand of sand erupting to crush the lava master. You face me now, Jinchuriki of the Four Tails, Gaara's voice echoed, cold and commanding. While the two masters of area denial began their cataclysmic duel, turning the arena floor into a churning hellscape of sand and lava, the battle of pure physical power was joined. Han moved. His armor vented a massive cloud of steam, and he shot across the arena with the force of a cannonball, his trajectory aimed not at Naruto, but at the seemingly vulnerable Gaara. But he never reached his target. Naruto's form flickered, and he was simply there, between them. He didn't use Hiraishin. It was pure, unadulterated sage speed. He met Han's steam-propelled charge not with a block, but with a single, open palm. The impact was like a thunderclap. A shockwave erupted from Naruto's hand, a visible dome of force that blasted the sand outwards for 50 feet. Han, the armored juggernaut, was stopped dead, his momentum utterly negated. He was thrown back, his armored boots carving deep trenches in the ground as he skidded to a halt, his entire body humming from the force. Naruto hadn't moved an inch. Going after the long-range fighter first? He said, his voice calm. Smart. But you're not getting anywhere near him. Han's armor hissed, venting steam from its joints. He stared at Naruto, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. The boy hadn't even seemed to strain. The sage's art. Your strength is unnatural. You have no idea, Naruto replied, and then he vanished. Han's senses screamed. He spun, bringing up an armored arm to block, but Naruto was already behind him. A punch, wreathed in the wild energy of the Kitsune realm, slammed into Han's back. It wasn't a jab, it was a meteor strike. The sound was not of flesh on metal, but of a mountain cracking. The crimson armor, a legendary defense, dented inward with a deafening groan, and Han was launched across the arena like a stone skipped on water. He crashed into a sandstone pillar, shattering it on impact. Before the dust could even settle, Naruto was on him, a phantom of white and gold. Han tried to counter, his fists lashing out in steam-powered bursts, but he was fighting a ghost. Naruto was too fast, his movements a glitch in reality. He would phase out of existence to avoid a punch, only to reappear at Han's flank to deliver a devastating kick that sent new cracked spider webbing across the Iwan Nin's armor. Naruto's hands, now tipped with the sharp, silver claws of Fox Sage mode, became his primary weapon. He raked them across Han's chest plate. The sound was a horrifying shriek of metal on metal as the sage-enhanced claws tore through the specialized armor as if it were tin, leaving 5 deep, glowing gouges behind. Han roared, a mixture of pain and fury, and unleashed a massive, 360-degree burst of superheated steam from his armor, trying to create distance. Naruto simply leapt, flipping backwards through the scalding cloud, completely unharmed, landing lightly 100 feet away. He was toying with him. He was completely, utterly dominant. Meanwhile, Gaara and Roshi's battle had reached a fever pitch. Roshi, realizing he couldn't overpower Gaara's sand on a large scale, focused his attacks, spewing concentrated streams of lava that Gaara was forced to counter with dense, layered shields. Your sand is useless against my flame, Roshi roared, slamming his palms on the ground. Lava release, scorching rocks jutsu. Dozens of massive, molten boulders shot from a newly formed river of lava, arcing through the air. Gaara raised a hand, and a colossal, dome-like shield of sand rose to meet the barrage, the impacts shaking the entire arena. Under the cover of the bombardment, Roshi sank into the lava, disappearing. He was hunting, preparing to strike from below. Naruto, who had been preparing to end his own fight, felt it instantly with his sage senses. He saw Roshi's chakra signature moving beneath the earth, a subterranean threat closing in on Gaara's blind spot. "Gaara, below you." Naruto sent the thought, a desperate warning. But he was too late. The ground directly beneath Gaara's sand shield erupted. Roshi burst forth, his entire body cloaked in the bubbling, red-hot aura of the Four Tails chakra. His fist, a molten hammer, was aimed directly at the Kazekage's head. Gaara's sand shield, already committed to the aerial defense, couldn't react in time. In that impossible, split second, Naruto made his choice. He abandoned his dominant position over the battered Han and hurled a Hiraishin kunai. It flew not at Roshi, but at a spot on the ground directly between the Lava Master and Gaara. He vanished. He reappeared just as Roshi's molten fist was about to connect. He had no time for a jutsu. He just crossed his arms in a desperate, last-ditch block, pouring every ounce of his sage chakra into the simple defensive posture. The impact was cataclysmic. The sound of sizzling flesh and the sharp crack of breaking bone echoed across the battlefield. Naruto cried out, a raw, agonized sound, as the sheer, unholy heat of Roshi's lava cloak seared through his arms, and the force of the blow sent him flying like a broken doll. He crashed into one of the Colosseum's main pillars with enough force to send a spider web of cracks racing up the 100-foot structure. He slumped to the ground, his arms a mangled, steaming ruin, his white coat stained with blood and soot. Naruto. Gaara's roar of fury was inhuman. A tidal wave of sand, no longer controlled but driven by pure, protective rage, erupted from the ground, forcing a surprised Roshi to leap back. Han, seeing his opening, appeared above the fallen Naruto, his armored foot raised for a final, bone-shattering stomp. "Now you fall, little flash," he growled. But the foot never landed. It was stopped, inches from Naruto's head, by a wall of shimmering, crimson energy, shaped like a skeletal ribcage. From the ground, Naruto pushed himself to one knee, his head bowed. His mangled arms were already healing, the steam rising from them not from heat, but from the Kyūbi's chakra knitting the flesh back together at a visible rate. He looked up, and the blue of his eyes was gone, replaced by the spinning, three-bladed pinwheel of his Mangekyo Sharingan, blazing with a cold, terrible fury. The Susanoo. The real battle had just begun. The crimson, skeletal ribcage of the Susanoo was a declaration. It was an ancient, terrifying power that had no place in the world of mortals, and its sudden appearance on a 16-year-old boy sent a shockwave of pure disbelief through the two veteran Iwa nin. Han, his armored boots still hovering in the air, recoiled as if burned. "What is this demonic power?" he growled, his voice a mixture of fury and a new, unsettling fear. "The Uchiha's cursed eyes." Roshi rasped from across the churning battlefield, his molten lava cloak sputtering. So the rumors were true. The Nine Tails carries the blood of the Uchiha. Naruto rose to his full height, the crimson energy swirling around him like a vengeful aura. His mangled arms, already healed by Kurama's chakra, flexed at his sides. The Mangekyo Sharingan in his eyes held no warmth, no trace of the boy who had joked with Gaara just hours before. It was the cold, analytical gaze of an executioner. "You made a mistake." Naruto's voice was a low, dangerous whisper that seemed to echo in the vast arena. "You hurt my friend." The skeletal ribcage began to grow, ethereal muscles and tendons of crimson chakra weaving themselves into a full upper torso. A second, spectral arm formed, then a skull-like head with hollow, burning eyes. The sheer, oppressive pressure of the chakra made the very air feel heavy, thick with a power born of loss and rage. "This ends now," Roshi snarled, deciding that this new threat had to be erased immediately. He pushed his own chakra to its limit, the lava armor around him flaring violently. "You want a monster, brat? I'll show you a real monster." His body began to contort, to expand. A torrent of molten rock poured from his mouth, not as an attack, but as the foundation for a new, terrifying form. The ground cracked and split as a colossal, ape-like creature with four tails and gorilla-like fangs erupted from the shell of Roshi's human body, its fur a mix of red fur and molten rock. It threw its head back and roared, a sound that was half beast, half volcano. Son Goku, the four-tailed monkey king, had been unleashed. Han, seeing his partner's escalation, knew that holding back was no longer an option. He was battered, his legendary armor torn and dented, but his will was unbroken. With a final, explosive hiss, his armor shattered outwards. A massive, blinding cloud of steam engulfed his position, and from it emerged a creature of impossible scale. It was a magnificent, titanic beast that was a hybrid of a dolphin and a horse, its pure white hide shimmering with an inner light, its 5 long, flowing tails swaying like banners in the wind. Kokuo, the 5 tails, joined the fray. The arena, which had been a battlefield for 4 shinobi, was now a cage for 2 rampaging Baijuo. Gaara, who had been preparing a massive sand assault to support Naruto, could only stare, his own considerable power dwarfed by the sheer, world-ending scale of the 2-tailed beasts. From within his ethereal crimson fortress, Naruto looked at the 2 colossal monsters, and a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "All right," he said to the empty air. "You 2 want to play with the big toys? Fine by me." He bit his thumb and slammed his hand on the ground, pouring his chakra not just into the earth, but into the very seal that bound his soul to another's. Summoning jutsu. The explosion of smoke wasn't just large, it was biblical. It was a pillar of red and black energy that shot 1,000 feet into the sky, a signal fire that could be seen for 100 miles. A roar erupted from the smoke, a sound that shook the heavens, a sound of pure, unrestrained, and utterly arrogant power. When the smoke cleared, the 2 Iwa Baijuo were no longer the largest things on the field. A mountain of malevolent orange fur and unrestrained fury stood there, its 9 tails lashing the air like whips. Kurama was free. "Humph," the great fox's voice boomed, a sound like grinding continents. He looked at Son Goku and Kokuo with an expression of pure, disdainful boredom. "Look at these pathetic little pets. You called me for this, kid?" Naruto, standing on Kurama's head, just grinned. Time to show them the difference between a king and a couple of court jesters. He closed his eyes, and the crimson Susanoo around him dissolved, only to immediately begin reforming on a colossal scale. The ethereal energy flowed over Kurama's orange fur like liquid armor, shaping itself into a massive, samurai-like exoskeleton. A horned helmet formed over Kurama's head, and a breastplate settled over his chest. In its newly formed hands, the armored avatar held a set of 3 tomoe-shaped projectiles, the Yasaka Magatama, already spinning with a deadly, divine light. The 2 Iwa Jinchuriki, in their full Baijuo forms, stared at the sight before them. It was a waking nightmare. An armored god of destruction, radiating a power so immense it made their own feel like a flickering candle in a hurricane. For the first time, they felt a genuine, primal fear. Gaara, watching from the edge of the battlefield, felt a wave of awe wash over him. He was witnessing the birth of a legend. He raised his hands, and the sand of the arena began to shift, not to attack, but to support, creating massive earthen walls to corral their opponents, turning the Colosseum into a true killing ground. "Ready to dance?" Naruto's voice echoed from within the armored giant. Kurama just grinned, a flash of fangs the size of houses. With a roar that was a promise of utter annihilation, the armored Kurama charged. The charge of the armored Kurama was not the charge of a living creature, it was the charge of a god of war. The ground shattered with every thunderous step, the Susanoo clad Baijuo a crimson and orange comet of pure annihilation. Son Goku, the 4-tailed ape, roared in defiance and met the charge head-on, his fists like molten meteors. The clash was apocalyptic. The Susanoo's armored fist met Son Goku's, and a shockwave of unimaginable force erupted, flattening Gaara's carefully constructed sand walls and sending a hurricane of superheated air across the desert. While Son Goku was locked in a contest of brute strength, Kokuo, the 5 tails, saw its opening. It galloped with the speed of a phantom, its 5 tails whipping around to flank the armored titan, steam pouring from its equine nostrils as it prepared a devastating ramming attack. "I don't think so," Gaara's cold voice echoed from the edge of the battlefield. The ground beneath Kokuo turned into a deep, grasping quagmire. Sand tsunami. A colossal wave of sand, 100 times larger than the one he'd used against the Iwa army, rose from the desert floor. It didn't just strike Kokuo, it engulfed it, a suffocating, grinding prison that instantly halted its charge. "Insolent Nat." Kurama's voice boomed from within the Susanoo. He overpowered Son Goku's guard, his other armored hand grabbing the ape by the face and slamming him into the ground with enough force to create a new crater in the arena. The battle was a one-sided slaughter. The power of the 9 tails, augmented by the Uchiha's ultimate defense, was on a level the other Baijuo simply couldn't comprehend. The armored Kurama was faster, stronger, and thanks to Naruto's Mangekyo and Gaara's support, possessed a tactical awareness they couldn't match. Kokuo broke free from the sand prison, only to be met by a volley of Yasaka Magatama that exploded against its hide, sending it reeling. Seeing their impending defeat, the 2 Iwa Baijuo fell back on their final, desperate strategy. They scrambled to the far side of the arena, standing side by side. Their mouths opened in unison, and particles of positive and negative chakra began to coalesce into two dense, swirling black spheres. A coordinated, double Baijuu bomb. So, that's how you want to play, Naruto's voice echoed. The armored Kurama didn't brace for impact. It drew its own colossal katana, a blade of pure crimson energy. The two Baijuu bombs fired, two screaming projectiles of world-ending power that tore through the air, merging into a single, massive orb of destruction. The Susanoo's blade swung. It was a single, elegant, impossible arc. The crimson blade met the Baijuu bomb, and instead of an explosion, there was a sound like a great bell ringing. The blade didn't block the attack, it cut it. The massive sphere of energy was sliced cleanly in two, the two halves flying harmlessly past the armored giant and detonating against the distant mountains, their silent, blinding flashes painting the horizon white. The two Iwa Baijuu stared, their animalistic minds frozen in disbelief. In that moment of shock, the Susanoo armor dissolved into motes of crimson light, vanishing from Kurama's body. The great fox itself did not disappear but instead leapt, tackling the stunned Son Goku with the force of a falling mountain. Naruto, now free from the avatar, was in free fall. But he didn't fall. The red pigmentation of Fox Sage Mode flared around his eyes, and he became a blur, his speed outstripping even his own Hiraishin. He ran on the open air, his target locked. Kokuo. The Five Tails saw him coming, a tiny, insignificant speck against the morning sky. It reared its head, preparing a counterattack. It was too slow. Naruto's hands, now tipped with the silver, razor-sharp claws of his sage form, were held before him. He didn't aim for the Baijuu's hide. He aimed for a single, specific point. He was a golden needle aimed at the heart of a god. He struck. There was no grand explosion. There was only the quiet, sickening sound of his claws, empowered by the wild energy of the Kitsune realm, piercing through the dense hide of the Baijuu and deep into the body of the Jinchuriki within. Kokuo let out a final, mournful cry. Its massive, shimmering white body began to dissolve, breaking apart into countless particles of blue chakra that drifted up into the sky like ethereal snow. For a moment, the unconscious, mortally wounded body of Han was visible before he, too, dissolved into the light. The Five Tails was gone, its essence scattered to the winds, not to reform for years to come. Son Goku, pinned beneath the full weight of Kurama, let out a roar of pure, horrified rage at the sight of his comrade's demise. He struggled, trying to throw the Nine Tails off. "It's over, Roshi," Gaara's voice commanded. A tidal wave of sand crashed over the struggling ape, adding its immense pressure to Kurama's hold. Layer after layer of sand, infused with Gaara's chakra, formed a grinding, suffocating prison, immobilizing the Four Tails completely. Naruto landed lightly on the sand, the adrenaline of the kill fading, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. He walked to the restrained Baijuu, a brush and a scroll already in his hand. He didn't look at Roshi's horrified eyes, visible through Son Goku's chakra. He was a craftsman now, his work precise and absolute. He moved with a blinding speed, his sage-enhanced body a blur as he painted a complex, multi-layered array of seals directly onto the Baijuu's body. The ink glowed with a brilliant, golden light. Fuinjutsu, Baijuu chakra suppression, maximum seal, Naruto declared, slamming his palm onto the final character. The golden seals flared, sinking into Son Goku's form. The great ape's roars of fury turned into a strangled cry of confusion, then silence. The violent, molten chakra that powered its form was snuffed out like a candle. The colossal body collapsed in on itself, dissolving not into light, but into a heap of inert rock and sand, leaving the unconscious, untransformed body of Roshi lying in the center, covered in a web of glowing, golden seals. The battle was over. Kurama stood, one massive paw resting possessively on the defeated Roshi, and let out a roar of pure, arrogant triumph that echoed across the desert. Naruto stood panting, the sage markings receding from his eyes. He looked at Gaara, who was staring back with a look of profound, unshakable awe. They had won. The triumphant roar of the Nine Tails was the only sound in the shattered Colosseum. It was the sound of absolute victory, a declaration that echoed for miles across the silent desert. The battle was over, the dust was settling, and the scale of what had just transpired began to sink in. Naruto stood panting, the last vestiges of his sage markings fading from his eyes. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the godlike battle was gone, and in its place, a wave of exhaustion so profound it was a physical pain washed over him. The use of the Mangekyo, the full Baijuu summoning, the sage art, it had all taken a tremendous toll. Humph. A decent warm-up, Kurama's voice grumbled in his mind, though the smug satisfaction was palpable. The colossal fox nudged Roshi's sealed form with a claw the size of a tree trunk. What do you want to do with this one, Kit? He'd make a fine chew toy. He's a prisoner of war, Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. With a final, proprietary snort, Kurama vanished in a vortex of chakra, returning to the seal and leaving a sudden, shocking silence in his wake. Gaara approached, his own movements slow and deliberate. He looked at the unconscious Roshi, then at Naruto, his teal eyes holding a look of deep, unshakable respect. Your strength is absolute. Our strength, Naruto corrected, a tired grin touching his lips. Couldn't have done it without you keeping the Five Tails busy. He gestured to the prisoner. He's all yours. A gift from Konoha to its allies. Gaara nodded. He raised a hand, and a wave of sand gently rose from the ground, forming a secure cocoon around Roshi's body, lifting him into the air. The prisoner was secured. The news reached that Tsuchikage's war camp not by messenger, but by the terrified, stumbling retreat of the Iwa vanguard. When the scout finally managed to stammer out his report in Anaki's command tent, the old cage's world turned to ash. Both of them? Anaki whispered, his voice a dry, cracking sound. Defeated? The scout, a veteran jonin whose face was a mask of pure terror, could only nod. Han-sama. He vanished. Into light. And Roshi-sama. They took him. The 9 tails and the 1 tail. It was a massacre. They are gods, Tsuchikage-sama. We cannot fight them. Anaki sank into his chair, the usual fire of his ambition extinguished. It wasn't just a strategic defeat, it was a complete and utter humiliation. In a single morning, he had lost his 2 greatest military assets, 2 veteran shinobi who were his comrades for decades, and the entire momentum of a war he had spent months planning. The rage was there, a molten core in his gut, but it was dwarfed by a cold, creeping despair. He had sent his best against 2 children, and those children had broken them. He had lost. The return to Sunagakure was a victor's march. When Naruto and Gaara appeared at the gates, with the Kazekage's sand bearing the unconscious, sealed form of Roshi, a wave of stunned silence fell over the village, followed by a deafening roar of celebration. They had not just defended their home, they had captured one of Iwagakure's living legends. Later, in the quiet of the Kazekage's office, Naruto stood before Gaara, his pack on his back, ready to depart. My job here is done, Naruto said. The Iwa army is broken. Their spirit is shattered, and their strongest weapons are off the board. Your forces can handle whatever is left. Gaara nodded, his expression one of solemn gratitude. You have given my village a future, Naruto. The debt is one I can never repay. Just be a good friend, Naruto grinned. And a good Kazekage. That's payment enough. He tossed a familiar, 3-pronged kunai onto Gaara's desk. A direct line. If you ever need me, I'm just a flash away. Try not to use it unless the world is ending, though. This trip took more out of me than I thought. The toll of the battle was finally catching up to him, a deep, cellular exhaustion that no amount of Kurama's chakra could instantly heal. Gaara picked up the kunai, the cool metal a symbol of their new, unbreakable bond. Safe travels. My friend. With a final, tired smile and a wave, Naruto placed a hand on the marker. In a silent, golden flash, he was gone. The world resolved into the familiar, paper-strewn chaos of the Hokage's office. Tsunade, who had been in a heated argument with Jiraiya, froze mid-shout, her jaw agape as Naruto simply appeared in the middle of the room. He looked like a ghost. His white coat was torn and scorched, his face was pale, and the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion radiating from him was a palpable force. Report, Tsunade managed to say, her voice tight with concern. Naruto didn't have the energy for a long-winded story. The Western Front is secure, he stated, his voice raspy. The Iwagakure vanguard is shattered. Han of the 5 tails is dead. Roshi of the 4 tails has been captured by Sunagakure. He looked his Hokage in the eye, offering a weak, lopsided grin. Requesting medical leave. I think I'm gonna go sleep for a week. Before Tsunade could even process the staggering geopolitical implications of his report, Naruto swayed on his feet, his eyes rolling back. He collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the floor, caught at the last second by a stunned Jiraiya. The mission was over. The yellow flash had returned home. For a moment, Tsunade and Jiraiya could only stare at the boy, the living weapon, the miracle worker, who now looked like nothing more than a broken child. Jiraiya, still holding him, gently lowered him to the floor. Tsunade was at his side in an instant, her hands glowing with the calm, green light of her medical ninjutsu. The gambler, the Sannin, the wartime commander, all of it fell away, replaced by the focused, analytical gaze of the world's greatest medic. Chakra exhaustion, severe, she murmured, her hands hovering over Naruto's body, diagnosing him with a speed that was a jutsu in itself. Cellular tearing from the sage art, minor internal hemorrhaging from the Baijuu transformation. And his optic nerves are fried. She looked up at Jiraiya, her expression a mixture of awe and fury. What in the hell did you let him do out there? Let him? Jiraiya scoffed, a tired, proud grin on his face. There was no letting him. He took command of a world war, Tsunade. He just won a front for us. The staggering truth of Naruto's report finally crashed through the shock. Han dead. Roshi captured. The Iwagakure army shattered. It wasn't just a victory, it was a miracle, a strategic impossibility that had just become a fact. Tsunade's face broke into a slow, wide, and utterly ferocious grin. It was the look of a gambler who had just bet everything on a single, impossible hand and won the entire world. Shizune, she roared, her voice booming with renewed power. Shizune burst into the room, her eyes wide. Get a medical team. Take him to the hospital, main recovery ward. Give him the best of everything. And not a word of this to anyone. Jiraiya, get back out there on the front. I need you to hold down the lines a while longer. As the medics carefully lifted Naruto onto a stretcher, Tsunade turned to her war council, the triumphant fire back in her eyes. Get me the intelligence division. I want a report on every Iwa and Kumo troop movement. Now. She pointed a finger at a communications officer. And you. Get me a secure line. I'm broadcasting a message to every shinobi in this village. The news hit Konoha not as a rumor, but as a thunderclap. Tsunade's voice, amplified by the Yamanaka clan's jutsu, was broadcast directly into the minds of every Jonin and Chunin commander on the battlefield and within the village. The message was simple, brutal, and electrifying. To all shinobi of the Leaf. The Western Front is victorious. The Iwagakure invasion force has been shattered by the combined might of the Konoha-Suna alliance, led by our own Naruto Uchiha and the Kazekage, Gaara of the Sand. One of their Jinchuriki is dead, the other is a prisoner of war. The sand is secure. Now, we turn our full attention to the north. We will hold the line. We will drive them back. The will of fire burns brighter than ever. The effect was instantaneous. On the northern front, where Asuma's and Kurenai's teams were locked in a desperate, bloody stalemate with Kumo forces, the news was a shot of pure adrenaline. A roar of triumph went up from the exhausted Leaf shinobi. They weren't just fighting a defensive war anymore, they were on the winning side. Their attacks became fiercer, their resolve hardened into a wall of unbreakable steel. In the village, the oppressive cloud of fear that had settled over the civilians lifted. The whispers in the street changed. The name Naruto Uchiha was no longer just the name of the clan head's son, it was a legend reborn. They called him the Golden Flash of the Uchiha, the second Yellow Flash. He was no longer a potential weapon, he was their hero. The morale of the entire nation soared. Far to the north, in his command tent, the 4th Raikage, A, received the report from his fastest scout. He listened in stony silence, his massive arms crossed over his chest. When the scout was finished, A simply dismissed him. He stood alone for a long moment, staring at the map of the Land of Fire. Anaki, you old fool, he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He had counted on the Iwa army to divide Konoha's forces, to bleed them dry. Instead, Anaki's greatest weapons had been broken against a single 16-year-old boy. The Western Front hadn't just held, it had vanished as a threat. And now, the full, undivided attention of Konoha's military might, buoyed by a massive surge in morale, was focused solely on him. This was no longer a simple invasion. It had just become a far more dangerous war. Naruto woke to the gentle, rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor and the scent of antiseptic. He felt heavy, as if every limb was made of lead. He cracked his eyes open. The world was a wash of sterile white, the corners of the hospital ceiling taking a moment longer than they should to resolve into sharp lines. His vision was slightly, almost imperceptibly, more blurry than he remembered. He blinked a few times, but the faint haze at the edge of his perception remained. Look who's finally awake. He turned his head. His mother, Mikoto, sat in a chair beside his bed, a gentle, relieved smile on her face. His father, Fugaku, stood by the window, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable as ever. Mom? Dad? Naruto's voice was a dry rasp. How long? 3 days, Mikoto said softly, her hand gently brushing the hair from his forehead. Tsunade-sama said it was a miracle you woke up this soon. She said you burned through enough chakra to kill 10 jonin. Fugaku walked over, his presence a silent, towering comfort. He looked down at his son, and for the first time, Naruto saw the mask of the Uchiha clan had completely gone. He saw only his father, his eyes filled with a fierce, profound pride and a deep, aching worry. "You did well, Naruto," Fugaku said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, his grip firm. "You have honored your clan, your village, and the memory of both your fathers." The simple, powerful praise meant more to Naruto than any promotion or accolade. A tired, genuine smile spread across his face. "I'm hungry." Mikoto just laughed, tears of relief finally tracing paths down her cheeks. "I'll go get you some ramen." As she bustled out of the room, Fugaku sat in the chair she had vacated. He looked at Naruto, his expression turning serious once more. "The war in the north still rages. Jiraiya is holding the line, but it is a brutal fight. When you are recovered, you will be needed." Naruto nodded, the weight of his duty settling back onto his shoulders. The rest felt good, but it was just a pause. A breath before the next battle. He looked out the window at the blue Konoha sky, a sky he had fought and bled for. The path ahead was long, but he wouldn't have to walk it alone. He had his family, his friends, and a village that now saw him not as a monster, but as a hero. For now, that was more than enough. The 3 days Naruto spent in the hospital were a strange, surreal calm after the storm. The first day was lost to a deep, healing sleep. The second was a blur of medical checkups, Tsunade herself running a battery of tests, her expression a mixture of clinical fascination and maternal concern. She confirmed her initial diagnosis: his optic nerves had been severely strained by the Mangekyo, and while they would heal, she warned him that repeated use would inevitably lead to permanent damage. It was a sobering thought, a reminder that his new power came with a terrible, finite price. On the third day, his friends came to visit. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. Team Guy, Team Kurenai, and what was left of Team Asuma all crammed into his small hospital room, bringing with them a chaotic, welcome wave of noise and life. "You were totally awesome, Naruto," Kyūbi yelled, Akamaru yipping in agreement from his jacket. "We heard the broadcast on the front. Took out a Jinchuriki, just like that." "It was a most logical application of overwhelming force," Shino commented, his voice a low monotone that was his version of high praise. Sakura was there, not as a friend, but as a student of the 5th Hokage. She stood beside Tsunade, observing the readings on his chart with a professional eye. "His chakra coils are regenerating at an unprecedented rate, Master," she noted quietly. "The Uzumaki vitality combined with the Nine Tails influence. It's remarkable." Shikamaru leaned against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets, a lazy but sharp look in his eyes. "You caused a real political mess, you know," he said, a hint of a smirk on his face. "The fire daimyo is ecstatic. The elders are terrified. It's been a real drag to watch." Naruto just grinned, soaking it all in. These were his friends, his comrades. He was no longer the outsider, but the pillar they were all looking to. The feeling was a warm, steadying presence in his chest. Later that afternoon, he was discharged, returning home to the quiet of the Uchiha compound. The contrast was stark. The village celebrated him as a hero, but here, he was just a son. That evening, after a quiet dinner, he found his father in the study, staring at a map of the world. "The northern front is a meat grinder," Fugaku said without looking up, his voice a low rumble. "Jiraiya is a master of guerrilla warfare, but the Raikage is a force of nature. He is matching Jiraiya's strategy with pure, unadulterated power. We are holding, but we are paying for every inch of ground and blood." He finally turned, his dark eyes meeting Naruto's. "Tsunade has kept me informed. I know of Sasuke's mission." The name hung in the air between them, a shared, secret weight. To the world, Sasuke was a traitor. To them, he was a soldier on the most dangerous mission of his life, an undercover operation to infiltrate Orochimaru's ranks and dismantle his operations from the inside. "I have 2 sons fighting 2 different wars," Fugaku said, the mask of the clan head falling away to reveal the weary face of a father. "One in the light, celebrated as a hero. The other in the darkness, condemned as a traitor. The burden you both carry is immense. We'll both come home," Naruto said, his voice ringing with a conviction that was absolute. "Once this is over, I'll get strong enough, and I'll go get him. We'll bring him back. That's a promise." Fugaku's face softened, a rare, proud smile touching his lips. "I know you will." Naruto's week of mandated rest passed in a blur of light training and quiet contemplation. The slight blurriness in his vision remained, a constant, humbling reminder of the limits of his power. On the 8th day, he was summoned. He stood in the Hokage's office, clad in a fresh white coat, his body fully healed, his spirit steeled. Tsunade stood before him, the cage hat on her head, her expression one of grim command. The Northern Front has become a battle of attrition we cannot afford to lose, she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. The Raikage is leading the charge himself. His speed is legendary, and his power is absolute. He has broken through our outer lines. Jiraiya needs a scalpel, a weapon that can cut through the chaos and strike at the heart of the Kumo army. She looked Naruto dead in the eye, the full weight of her command settling on his shoulders. You are that scalpel. Jiraiya has already placed a Hiraishin marker at the central command post. Your mission is simple: get there, link up with him, and break the Raikage's army. Do whatever it takes. You are the tip of our spear, Naruto. Do not fail. Naruto didn't speak. He simply reached into his pouch and produced a single, three-pronged kunai, the seal on its handle seeming to hum with a faint, golden light. He gave his Hokage a sharp, confident nod. Konoha's golden flash is on the way. He placed a hand on a Hiraishin marker hidden on Tsunade's own desk. With a silent, brilliant flash of golden light, he was gone. The Northern Front was a hell of mud, steel, and lightning. The air was thick with the smell of scorched earth and blood, a constant barrage of Kumo's lightning-style jutsu turning the forest into a splintered graveyard. In a hastily fortified command post, Might Guy and Asuma Sarutobi were holding off a flanking maneuver, their own teams pushed to their absolute limits. Their numbers are too great, Guy yelled, his powerful kicks sending two Kumo nin flying. If we cannot hold this position, the main camp will be overrun. Suddenly, a brilliant, blinding flash of golden light erupted in the center of their defensive line. Every shinobi on the battlefield, leaf and cloud alike, froze, their eyes wide. When the light faded, a figure stood there, his back to the Konoha forces. He wore a long white coat with red flames, and his blonde hair seemed to catch the light like a halo. He turned his head, his calm blue eyes sweeping over the battlefield, and a confident, almost lazy, grin spread across his face. Sorry I'm late, Naruto Uchiha said, his voice carrying easily over the din of battle. Looks like you guys could use a hand. The appearance of Naruto Uchiha was not a reinforcement, it was a paradigm shift. The Kumo shinobi froze, seeing a ghost. By the gods! It's Minato-sensei's boy, Asuma Sarutobi breathed. Might Guy's usual boisterous grin was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated awe. Such a youthful and dynamic entrance. The flames of his spirit burn with the heat of 1,000 suns. Naruto's grin, however, held no laziness. It was a sharp, predatory expression. He entered Fox Sage mode in an instant, the red pigmentation around his eyes a stark declaration of war. And then he vanished. He wasn't just fast, he was a concept. The Kumo front line, a wall of 200 hardened shinobi, simply dissolved. To the Konoha shinobi, it was a blur of motion. To the Kumo ninja, it was the apocalypse. One moment, a jonin was forming a hand sign, the next, a sage-enhanced fist slammed into his chest, sending him flying backward like a broken doll. Naruto was a one-man army, a whirlwind of fists, claws, and Rasengans that tore through the Kumo forces. After a solid minute of this one-sided slaughter, Naruto reappeared. The Kumo army was broken, the survivors having fled in terror. A triumphant roar went up from the Konoha ranks. Is that all of them? Asuma panted. Naruto's grin had faded. His sage senses were screaming. No, he said, his voice a low, serious growl. The big ones are here. As if summoned, three figures landed in the center of the devastated battlefield. The first was a mountain of muscle and fury, the fourth Raikage, A. The second was his brother, Killer B. And the third was a blonde-haired kunoichi with a cold gaze, Yugito ni, the Jinchuriki of the two tails. So, the Raikage's voice was a low, rumbling thunderclap. You're the one. Asuma-sensei. Guy-sensei. Naruto's voice rang out, a sharp, undeniable command. Get everyone back to the main camp. Now. You'll just be in the way. This is a cage-level fight. Go. There was a moment of hesitation, but the sheer authority in his voice was absolute. With a reluctant look, Asuma and Guy gave the order, and the Konoha forces began a swift retreat. On a ridge a safe distance away, they turned, unable to tear their eyes from the impossible scene. Across the valley, the scattered Kumo ninja did the same. A battle between gods was about to unfold, and they were its first audience. Confident, aren't you? The Raikage sneered. B and Yugito didn't wait. With a shared roar, their bodies were engulfed in Baiju's shrouds. In an instant, the colossal, eight-tailed Gyuki stood in B's place. Beside it, Yugito transformed into the Matatabi, a monstrous, two-tailed cat wreathed in spectral blue flames. Naruto's response was immediate. Shadow Clone Jutsu. One perfect copy appeared beside him, instantly entering Sage Mode. Keep him busy, the real Naruto said. The Raikage charged, a living bolt of thunder, but the Sage clone intercepted him in a golden flash. The two became a dizzying, high-speed stalemate of gold and lightning that tore up the landscape, a battle of pure speed that left the onlookers breathless. With A occupied, the real Naruto turned his full attention to the two rampaging Baijuo. The ground shook as the Gyuki charged, a living mountain of muscle and tentacles. Naruto didn't retreat. He shot forward to meet it, his body flickering, becoming a golden phantom that the massive beast couldn't track. He appeared on its flank, his hand extended, claws of pure nature energy glinting in the sun. He raked them across the Baiju's hide, the sage-enhanced claws tearing a deep gouge that sent up a spray of purple blood. The Gyuki roared in pain and fury, spinning to crush him, but Naruto was already gone, a golden flash appearing 100 yards away. He had its attention. The Matatabi, seeing an opening, unleashed a volley of massive fireballs, each one a roaring inferno. Naruto weaved between them, his sage senses predicting their trajectory perfectly. He used the Hiraishin, teleporting between the kunai scattered across the battlefield, making himself an impossible target. For the next 10 minutes, the battlefield was his playground. He was a whirlwind of gold, fighting a two-front war against monsters. He'd use the Gyuki's massive size against it, tricking it into crashing into the Matatabi. He'd use his speed to land a devastating, meteor-like punch to the Matatabi's jaw, the force of the single blow sending the flaming cat tumbling back. The shinobi watching from the ridges could barely comprehend what they were seeing. It wasn't a fight, it was a culling. A single shinobi was dominating two fully transformed tailed beasts. But the strain was immense. Naruto was panting, sweat beading on his brow. Maintaining Sage Mode while performing such high-level taijutsu and Hiraishin jumps was a massive drain on his stamina and the nature energy he could gather. He could feel his connection to the natural world thinning, the power beginning to wane. He had bruised them, battered them, and proven his superiority, but Baijuo were walking mountains of chakra. They could regenerate. He could not. The Gyuki, recovering from his last blow, began to spin its tentacles into a vortex, gathering chakra for a tailed beast bomb. The Matatabi did the same. Two world-ending attacks were powering up simultaneously. Naruto knew his Sage Mode was finished. He couldn't dodge both. It was time to escalate. He looked across the battlefield at his clone, which was still locked in its impossible dance with the Raikage. He gave a mental command. The clone disengaged, leaving a furious A standing on a newly formed cliff. The clone landed beside the original, panting. "You have fun?" the original asked. "He's fast," the clone admitted. "But he's predictable." The clone dispelled, flooding Naruto with a final burst of nature energy and a wealth of tactical data on the Raikage's fighting style. Naruto took a deep, steadying breath, his Sage Mode stabilizing for one final, massive act. He looked at the two charging Baijuo bombs, and a wild, fierce grin spread across his face. "All right, my turn," he said to the empty air. "Time to get serious." He slammed his hand on the earth. Summoning Jutsu. The pillar of crimson energy that erupted from Naruto's summoning jutsu was not a cloud of smoke, it was a tear in the fabric of the world. A roar of pure, unrestrained, and utterly arrogant power ripped through the heavens, a sound that was burned into the collective memory of every shinobi watching from the ridges. From the swirling vortex emerged a mountain of malevolent orange fur and unrestrained fury. Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, stood in his full, magnificent glory, his 9 tails lashing the air like whips. He saw the two incoming tailed beast bombs, and his lips peeled back in a snarl that was a mixture of contempt and glee. Pathetic, his voice boomed, a tidal wave of sound. He opened his own maw, gathering a sphere of positive and negative chakra so dense it bent the light around it. He didn't just match their attack, he overpowered it. His tailed beast bomb met theirs midair in a cataclysmic explosion that vaporized a square mile of the forest and sent a shockwave that flattened trees for miles. The shinobi on the ridges were thrown to the ground, the sheer force of the blast stealing the air from their lungs. They looked on in horror and awe as the battlefield was momentarily consumed by a miniature sun. From his perch on Kurama's head, Naruto was already moving. He didn't give his opponents a moment to recover. His eyes bled from blue to the spinning pinwheel of his Mangekyo Sharingan. Kurama. The great fox understood. A colossal suit of crimson, samurai-like armor flared to life, enveloping Kurama's form in the ethereal energy of the Susanoo. The sight was a waking nightmare for the Kumo ninja, a god of destruction clad in the armor of a demon. But Naruto wasn't finished. From within the armored construct, he formed another seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A single, perfect clone appeared beside him on the Susanoo's head. This one felt different, denser, imbued with a massive portion of chakra. "He's all yours," the real Naruto commanded, nodding towards the Raikage, who was just recovering from the shock of the blast. The clone gave a sharp grin, its own eyes taking on the red pigmentation of Sage Mode. In a golden flash, it vanished, reappearing on the battlefield to re-engage the furious Raikage. The dizzying stalemate of gold and lightning resumed, a separate, high-speed war waged in the shadow of the colossal Baijuo battle. Now, Naruto could focus. "Let's dance," his voice echoed from within the armored Kurama. What followed was not a battle, it was a culling. The armored Kurama was a force of utter dominance. The Matatabi, wreathed in its spectral blue fire, lunged, its claws like razors. The Susanoo's massive chakra blade met the attack, the clash of ethereal energy and Baijuo fire sending sparks the size of boulders raining down. While it was occupied, the Gyuki charged from the flank, its 8 tentacles whipping forward. Kurama just laughed. His own 9 tails, each now sheathed in crimson Susanoo chakra, shot out like living weapons. They met the Gyuki's tentacles head-on, ensnaring them, overpowering them. The armored Kurama now held both Baijuo in its grasp. "Is this all?" Naruto's voice taunted, echoing with a divine, amplified power. On the ridges, the onlookers could only stare, their minds struggling to process the scale of the conflict. He's fighting all 3 of them at once," Asuma breathed, his cigarette falling from his lips, forgotten. "It is the most youthful and awe-inspiring display of power I have ever witnessed." Might Guy declared, tears of pure, unrestrained passion streaming down his face. "He is a true legend in the making." The Kumo ninja were silent, their faces pale with the dawning, horrifying realization that their village had picked a fight with a living god. For the next 10 minutes, the battlefield was a canvas of impossible power. The armored Kurama was a whirlwind of destruction, its every blow reshaping the landscape. The Sage Clone and the Raikage were a blur of gold and lightning, their battle so fast it could only be tracked by the shockwaves that periodically erupted from their clashes. But even a god could feel the strain. The real Naruto, safe within the Susanoo's cockpit, was panting, sweat pouring down his face. The mental load of maintaining a Sage Mode clone in a cage-level fight while simultaneously controlling the armored Kurama and his own Mangekyo was a monumental burden. A sharp, searing pain was beginning to throb behind his eyes, the first protest of his overused dojutsu. He knew he had to end this. He had proven his superiority. Now, he had to prove his lethality. A mental command, sharp and final, shot from the real Naruto to his Sage clone. It was time for the finishing blow. The clone, which had been locked in a dizzying dance of evasion with the Raikage, suddenly broke its pattern. It threw a Hiraishin kunai high into the air, a feint A had seen a dozen times. Enraged by the constant mockery and the humiliation of being held at bay by a mere copy, the Raikage charged, his arm cocked back for a final, decisive lariat, determined to obliterate the clone for good. But the clone didn't teleport to the kunai. In a golden flash, it appeared directly behind the charging Raikage, having teleported to a marker it had silently slapped onto Ai's back during a previous exchange. Its hands were no longer empty. They were now armed with the silver, sage-enhanced claws of the kitsune, glowing with an unholy light. "You're too slow," the clone whispered. Before the Raikage could even register the betrayal of his own senses, the clone's hand swept down in a single, brutal arc. It was not a punch, but a clean, perfect cut. The silver claws, harder than diamond and honed by nature energy, sliced through muscle, bone, and lightning-infused chakra as if they were paper. The Raikage's left arm, from the shoulder down, flew from his body in a spray of blood. A raw, animalistic scream of pure agony and disbelief tore from his throat. The Sage clone, its purpose served, dissolved into smoke. With the Raikage momentarily out of the fight, the real Naruto focused all his will on the Baijuo. The armored Kurama roared, tightening its grip, its spectral hands ignoring the blue flames of the Matatabi and pinning the flaming cat to the ground. The great fox's own tails, sheathed in crimson chakra, tightened around the Gyuki, wrestling the larger, now panicked beast into submission. It was time to end it. The Susanoo armor dissolved. Kurama, panting but triumphant, held both Baijuo in his inescapable grip. Naruto, his Mangekyo still blazing, stumbled, a sharp, searing pain lancing through his eyes. The world wavered, the edges of his vision blurring into a gray haze. He pushed the pain down, knowing he had to finish this. He flashed toward the pinned Matatabi, his hands already weaving a complex series of seals he had learned from the third Hokage's private scrolls. He slammed his palm onto the Baijuo's forehead. Chakra suppression seal, 8th gate lockdown. A web of intricate, glowing black formula spread from his hand, covering the Matatabi's entire body. The beast let out a final, choked howl as its connection to Yugito and its own chakra was completely severed, a prison of Fuinjutsu so absolute it was a living death. The massive Baijuu form dissolved, reverting back to an unconscious Yugito ni, now covered in the faint, shimmering lines of the unbreakable seal. From the crater in the mountainside where he had landed, the one-armed Reikage watched in horror. One of his Jinchuriki was captured and sealed, the other was moments from the same fate, and his own body was broken. He had been utterly, completely defeated. With a roar of pure, frustrated rage, he appeared in a desperate flash of lightning, grabbing the struggling, reverting form of his brother from Kurama's grip and vanishing from the battlefield in a humiliating retreat. The battlefield fell silent. Kurama let out an exhausted snort and vanished in a puff of smoke, his job done. Naruto stood alone over the sealed form of Yugito ni. His Mangekyo faded, and the world became a painful, disorienting blur. He could barely make out the shapes of Asuma, Guy, and the other Konoha shinobi landing around him, their faces masks of pure, hero-worshipping awe. He stood tall, a true god of war surveying his victory, his voice a raw, strained command that rang with absolute authority. Secure the prisoner. Get her to the interrogation unit. She's a high-value asset. Send word to Tsunade-sama. The northern front is secure. He turned, trying to face his comrades, to give a reassuring grin, but the last of his strength was gone. The world finally dissolved into blackness, and he collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the ground. A wave of panic shouts erupted from the Konoha shinobi. The awe they felt turned into frantic, protective energy. Medics! Get the medics now, Asuma roared, kneeling beside Naruto's still form. Protect him. Form a perimeter, Guy commanded, his own voice filled with a fierce, paternal urgency. Follow his orders to the letter. The shinobi who had just witnessed a legend being born now scrambled to obey the commands of their fallen hero, their actions a testament to the new reality Naruto had forged in the fires of battle. The war on the northern front was over. He had won. The scene at the temporary Konoha command post was one of organized chaos. Medics swarmed around Naruto's unconscious form, their hands glowing with the green light of healing jutsu, their faces etched with a frantic urgency. The shinobi who had witnessed the battle moved with a newfound, almost fanatical zeal, their awe translated into crisp, efficient action. Guy's and Asuma's teams had already secured the unconscious Yugito ni, applying their own layers of suppression seals under the watchful eye of their jonin leaders. The perimeter was solidified, and scouts were dispatched, all following the last commands of their fallen hero to the letter. An hour later, Naruto was stable, resting in the main medical tent. His breathing was deep and even, but the medics couldn't wake him. It was a state of profound chakra exhaustion, his body and mind having been pushed far beyond any known limit. It was then that the messenger arrived. Not a standard Chunin runner, but one of Tsunade's personal Anbu couriers, appearing in a swirl of leaves in the center of the command tent where Asuma and Guy were receiving reports. The Anbu operative knelt, offering a scroll marked with the Hokage's personal seal. It was classified S rank, for their eyes only. Asuma broke the seal, his expression hardening as he read the contents. Guy read over his shoulder, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a grim understanding. A full recall? Guy murmured, his voice a low rumble. For every shinobi who witnessed the battle? But the front is still vulnerable. These aren't requests, Guy. They're orders, Asuma said, rolling the scroll back up. We are to leave a skeleton crew and return to the village at once for an emergency debriefing. She wants us back before dawn. The air in Konoha's torture and interrogation force headquarters was cold and sterile. In a deep, soundproof chamber, Inoiki Yamanaka stood with his arms crossed, his expression somber. Before him sat Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Fugaku. The atmosphere was heavy, not with the grief of loss, but with the weight of a monumental, dangerous decision. The Jonin are assembled and waiting, Inoiki said, his voice a low, professional monotone. They believe this is a standard memory confirmation for a battle report. Tsunade looked at the two men beside her. Jiraiya's face was a grim mask, the usual twinkle in his eyes extinguished. Fugaku was a statue of stone, but she could see the conflict warring in his dark eyes. To use his image as a tool of war. Fugaku's voice was a low growl of paternal protest. He is a shinobi of the leaf, not a poster boy for its propaganda. He is both, Fugaku, and you know it, Tsunade countered, her voice sharp as steel. Right now, he is our single greatest asset, and our single greatest vulnerability. The Kumo forces are in terrified disarray, but they will regroup. Iwa is still a threat. We have a window, a small one, To end this war before it truly begins. We can't do that with armies. We have to do it with fear. She stood, pacing the cold stone floor. Naruto won a battle today. I am going to use that victory to win the war. I will not have his sacrifice, the toll he paid with his own body and eyesight, be for nothing. She stopped and looked at Inoki. Her voice was cold, absolute, the voice of a wartime Hokage placing the biggest gamble of her life. I want you to extract the memories of the battle from every single witness. I want every angle, every detail. Compile them. We are not making a report. We are making a film. Inoki's eyes widened slightly, but he simply nodded. One by one, the Jonin who had been on that ridge were brought in. Asuma, Guy, Kurenai's team members. Inoki's hands would gently cup their heads, and for a few moments, he would be there, a silent observer on that muddy, war-torn ridge. He saw it all through their eyes, the impossible speed of the sage clone, the godlike visage of the armored Kurama, the terrifying, final moments of the battle, and the shocking collapse of their hero. When it was over, the raw visual data was projected onto a large screen in the chamber. It was a chaotic, visceral, and awe-inspiring spectacle. Tsunade watched, her face a mask of cold calculation. There, she said, pointing to the moment just after the Reikage had fled and the Baijuo had reverted. Naruto stood tall, a true god of war, the wind whipping his white coat, his voice ringing with authority as he issued his final commands. Cut it there. Fade to black. That is the final scene. That is the image the world will see. Jiraiya let out a slow, heavy breath. It was a ruthless, brilliant piece of psychological warfare. The world would see an invincible hero, a shinobi who could take on a cage and two-tailed beasts and walk away without a scratch, ready to issue orders for the next phase of the battle. Only a handful of people would ever know the truth. That Konoha's golden flash, their new god of war, was currently lying in a medical tent, broken and exhausted, his legendary vision now a painful, blurry haze. Tsunade's bluff had been placed. Now, they could only wait and see if the rest of the world was scared enough to fold. She always was a gambler at heart. Chapter 11. The propaganda blitz was a work of art in its own right, a masterpiece of speed and psychological warfare. Within hours of Inoki's work, Tsunade's Anbu, equipped with specially prepared projection scrolls, were dispatched. They moved like ghosts, not to engage in battle, but to deliver a message. Scrolls were left on the desks of daimyo, in the barracks of enemy commanders, and, most importantly, delivered directly to the cage of the great nations. In a windswept command tent on the border of the land of wind, Anaki, the third Tsuchikage, was seething. The report of the Suna massacre had been followed by a more horrifying one, the complete loss of contact with Han and Roshi. His two greatest weapons had vanished. It was in this state of cold fury that a Konoha scroll appeared on his war map, delivered by a phantom his senses hadn't even detected. His guards, wary of a trap, scanned it for explosives. Finding none, they presented it to him. Anaki broke the seal, and a projection flared to life in the dim light of the tent. It was not a message of surrender or a threat. It was a memory. He watched in stunned silence. He saw the impossible speed of the golden clone, the godlike visage of the armored Kurama, the casual way it dismantled two fully transformed tailed beasts. He saw the Reikage, a man whose power he knew intimately, have his legendary lightning armor shattered and his arm severed by a mere copy. He saw one of his own Jinchuriki sealed with a technique he had never witnessed, a prison of ink so absolute it made his blood run cold. And then he saw the final scene. The boy, Naruto Uchiha, standing tall amidst the carnage, not even breathing hard, his white coat pristine as he issued commands like a seasoned general. Then, the image faded to black, leaving only the quiet hiss of the tent's lanterns. The Tsuchikage, a man who had lived through 3 great wars and stood against Uchiha Madara himself, felt a sensation he had not experienced in decades, genuine, bottomless fear. This was not a shinobi. This was a natural disaster in human form. Tsunade hadn't sent him a threat, she had sent him proof. Proof that a direct war with Konoha was no longer a matter of strategy or numbers. It was suicide. Anaki sank into his chair, his ancient face a mask of grim, pragmatic defeat. Send word to Kyūbi, he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. Halt the advance. All Iwagakure forces are to pull back to the border. Immediately. In Kumagakure, the scene was even more personal. The Reikage, lay in a private medical ward, his left shoulder a stump of cauterized flesh and bandages. Killer B sat by his bedside, a rare, somber silence having replaced his usual rhymes. The projection scroll was played for them on the wall of the room. For A, it was a profound, public humiliation. He was forced to watch his own defeat, to see the casual, almost contemptuous ease with which a mere clone had outmaneuvered and dismembered him. He saw the capture of Yugito, the defeat of his brother, and the invincible stance of the boy who had caused it all. The rage was there, a hot, impotent fire. But beneath it was the cold, hard logic of a cage. He had gone up against that monster with 2 perfect Jinchuriki at his side and had been utterly, comprehensively annihilated. To continue the fight would be to send the rest of his village to their graves. He looked at his brother, who was watching the projection with a surprisingly analytical eye. "He's a whole different kind of beast, bro," B said, his voice quiet. "That fox. It ain't just a monster. They're partners, yo." A closed his eyes, the decision a bitter pill to swallow. "Send word to Daru," he commanded the guard at his door. "Full retreat. The war is over." Reports flooded the Hokage's office like a tidal wave. Iwagakure forces had halted their invasion of the Land of Wind and were in full withdrawal. The Kumo army on the northern front was pulling back, a disorganized and terrified rout. Tsunade's bluff hadn't just worked, it had shattered the enemy's will to fight. A war that should have bled the nations for years had been ended in a single day, by a single battle. A quiet, stunned victory settled over the war room. Jiraiya let out a slow, disbelieving whistle. "You crazy gambler," he said, looking at Tsunade with a new level of respect. "You actually did it." Fugaku remained silent, but the rigid tension in his shoulders finally eased. His son was safe. His village was safe. But in the main medical tent on the northern front, Naruto Uchiha was anything but victorious. He woke up slowly, a groan escaping his lips. The first thing he noticed was the pain. Not the dull ache of chakra exhaustion, but a sharp, searing fire behind his eyes. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the world remained a frustrating, indistinct blur. He could make out shapes, colors, but the fine details were gone, swallowed by a persistent gray haze. "Naruto? You're awake." Sakura's voice was a wave of pure relief. He saw her shape move closer, a blur of pink and green. "Yeah," he rasped, forcing a grin. "Just a little tired." He tried to sit up, his gaze sweeping the tent, trying to hide the fact that he couldn't properly focus on anything. But Sakura was no longer a simple Jinan. She was Tsunade's apprentice. She saw the way his eyes were unfocused, the slight tremor in his hands as he tried to push himself up. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, her palm glowing with a soft, diagnostic green chakra. "Don't move," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your chakra pathways are stable, but your optic nerves." Her brow furrowed in concentration and concern. "They're frayed. Badly." Just then, the flap of the tent opened. Tsunade and Fugaku stepped inside, their faces a mixture of relief and solemn duty. They had come to check on their hero. Naruto looked toward the sounds of their entry, a smile on his face, trying to project the image of the invincible warrior from the propaganda film. "Hey, Granny Tsunade, Dad. Did we win?" Tsunade looked at him, then at Sakura's grim, diagnostic expression, and her triumphant mood vanished, replaced by the cold, heavy reality of the price that had been paid. "Yes, Naruto," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "You won." She walked to his bedside, her medical expertise overriding her role as cage. Tsunade's command hung in the air, cold and absolute. "Now, let me see your eyes." Naruto hesitated, a flicker of fear cutting through his exhaustion. He tried to force a grin, to play it off. "They're fine, Granny, just a little tired from all the action." "That wasn't a request, Naruto," Tsunade said, her voice dropping, leaving no room for argument. She gently placed her hands on either side of his head, her thumbs tilting his face up towards the light of the medical lamp. Her own hands began to glow with a brilliant, impossibly complex aura of green chakra. This wasn't simple healing, it was the highest level of medical ninjutsu, a diagnostic scan of cellular depth. Fugaku stood beside her, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone that couldn't hide the storm of worry in his eyes. Tsunade's gaze was intense, her pupils dilating as she analyzed the flow of chakra through Naruto's optic nerves, the state of the blood vessels, the very structure of his retiny. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, she pulled her hands away, her expression grim. "It's as I feared," she said, her voice a low, clinical murmur that did nothing to hide her concern. "The use of the Mangekyo on that scale. It's done more than just strain the optic nerves, it's caused significant cellular degradation. It's like you burned out the wick on a candle. Your Uzumaki vitality can heal the strain, the inflammation. But it can't regenerate cells that have been completely annihilated. This damage is permanent." She looked him dead in the eye, the full weight of her prognosis settling over him. "If you use that power again, the degradation will accelerate. A few more times at this intensity. And you will go blind, Naruto. Permanently. The words were a physical blow. Blind. The Sharingan, his clan's greatest gift, the key to his power, was also a self-destruct switch. He thought of his father, of the Mangekyo he had seen him wield. Had he known this price? Was this the burden he carried in silence? Fugaku placed a heavy, grounding hand on Naruto's shoulder. It is the Uchiha's curse, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. Power at the cost of light. A choice every wielder of these eyes must eventually face. Naruto just stared at the blurry shape of his Hokage, the triumphant feeling of his victory turning to ash in his mouth. While Naruto confronted the cost of his power, Tsunade was busy leveraging the legend it had created. The Anbu couriers were not just sent to the cage. Her orders were broader, more audacious. Squads fanned out across the continent, their mission not one of assassination or espionage, but of information warfare. Projection scrolls were left in the dead of night at the headquarters of every major news agency in the elemental nations. Others were delivered to the courts of the neutral daimyo, from the land of rivers to the smaller coastal nations. It wasn't a threat, it was presented as a public service announcement, a bulletin from the front lines. This is what happened when you declared war on the Hidden Leaf. The reaction was immediate and seismic. In the bustling capital of the land of tea, the editor of the Shinobi Shimbun, the continent's most respected newspaper, watched the projection with his entire staff in stunned silence. They saw the golden phantom, the armored god, the cage dismembered, the Baiju sealed. It was the scoop of a lifetime. The next morning's headline, printed in the largest type they had, was simple and electrifying. Konoha's golden god, a new legend is born. The story spread like wildfire, carried by messenger birds and traveling merchants. In tea houses in the land of hot water and bars in the port cities of the land of waves, shinobi and civilians alike whispered the tale. They spoke of the fourth Hokage's son, a boy who had not just inherited his father's speed, but had surpassed his power, commanding the Nine Tails itself as a willing partner. The invincible warrior standing tall after felling 3 gods of war became the new benchmark for power, a modern myth whispered in the same breath as the Sage of Six Paths. The political fallout was just as swift. The Fire Daimyo, upon viewing the scroll, immediately doubled his military funding to Konoha. The neutral lords, who had been watching the Kumo-Iwa alliance with nervous apprehension, collectively decided that neutrality was the wisest, and only, possible course of action. An alliance with Konoha was an investment, opposition was a death sentence. The war had ended. Tsunade's bluff had worked. She had terrified the world into peace. But in a quiet medical tent on a forgotten front, the boy who had paid for that peace was just beginning to understand the true cost. He looked from his father's grim face to Tsunade's, a desperate hope warring with the cold reality sinking into his bones. But my healing factor is pretty good. It can fix anything, right? Tsunade's expression was one of profound, sorrowful pity. She shook her head slowly. Naruto, your healing factor can mend torn muscles and broken bones. It can regenerate tissue. It cannot unburn a candle wick. The cells in your eyes are not just damaged, a significant portion of them have been extinguished. They've been consumed as fuel for your Mangekyo. She took a deep breath, delivering the final, devastating blow with the cold precision of a surgeon. The blurriness, the lack of detail you're seeing now. That is your new normal. You can still see shapes, colors, movement. But the world will never be sharp again. To the standards of a normal civilian, you can see. But to the standards of a shinobi, a prodigy who relies on the pinpoint accuracy of the Sharingan, you are, for all intents and purposes, blind. And Naruto, she said, her voice softening into a quiet, heartbreaking finality, it's permanent. The word permanent hung in the sterile air of the medical room, a final, crushing weight. For a long moment, Naruto didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the blurry, indistinct shapes of his Hokage and his father, the architects of the victory that had cost him his sight. The triumphant roar of the world's adulation was a distant, mocking echo. Fugaku's hand tightened on his son's shoulder, bracing for the outburst, for the rage, for the despair that was sure to follow. Tsunade watched him, her heart aching with a familiar sorrow, the kind a doctor feels when there is no cure to offer. But the breakdown never came. Naruto took a slow, deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was not filled with anguish. It was quiet, steady, and held a chilling, almost unnerving clarity. I see, he said. He slowly raised a hand, looking at the hazy outline of his own fingers. He flexed them. When the third Hokage died, I awakened them. I knew the price then. I felt it. And when I saw the wreckage about to crush our flank, I made a choice. I chose to pay it. He looked up, his unfocused blue eyes seeming to pierce right through them. I paid the price to protect my home. To save my comrades. I don't regret it. The simple, absolute finality of his acceptance stunned both Tsunade and Fugaku into silence. This wasn't a boy in denial. This was a shinobi, a soldier, who had weighed the cost of victory and had willingly laid his own future on the altar. It was the decision of a true cage. Fugaku's stony facade finally cracked, a flicker of immense, heartbreaking pride shining in his eyes. Tsunade was the first to recover, her mind shifting instantly from doctor back to commander. She saw the new, terrifying reality of their situation. Your resolve is commendable, Naruto. But this changes everything. She began to pace, the gears of her strategic mind turning. The world didn't just see a powerful shinobi win a battle. They saw the eyes of an Uchiha commanding the Nine Tails. They fear those eyes. The legend, the propaganda, our entire victory rests on the image of that power. If word gets out that Konoha's golden god has been crippled, that his greatest weapon has been neutered, our victory will turn into an invitation for another attack. They will see us as a wounded lion, and they will come to finish the job. She stopped, her gaze sharp and intense. Your condition cannot leave this tent. It must become the most highly guarded, S-rank secret in this village. A secret is a temporary solution, Fugaku countered, his voice a low rumble. He is a shinobi. He cannot function on a battlefield if he cannot see his target. Then I'll just have to learn to see a different way, Naruto said. Both adults turned to him. A new, fierce light had entered his eyes, the light of a genius confronting an impossible problem. He closed his eyes, not in pain, but in concentration, remembering his training in the Kitsune realm. Jin-sensei. He told me that Fox Sage Mode wasn't just about power. It was about becoming a predator. About using nature energy to feel the world, not just see it, Naruto mused, more to himself than to them. When I'm in Sage Mode, I can feel everything. The flow of chakra, the shift in the air, the life force of every living thing. It's overwhelming. A hurricane of information. He opened his eyes, a theory blooming in his mind. But what if? What if I don't drink from the hurricane? What if I just take a sip? What if I learn to passively, constantly, channel a tiny, almost unnoticeable trickle of nature energy through my system? Not enough to transform, not enough for anyone to detect. Just enough to feel. The idea was audacious. Unprecedented. Sage Mode was a state to be entered, an ultimate trump card. To use it as a constant, passive sense was a level of control no one had ever even conceived of. But for Naruto, with his perfect harmony with Kurama and his training in a realm of pure nature energy, it was not just possible, it was the only path forward. A slow, impressed grin spread across Tsunade's face. A sensory field based on nature energy. Your blindness could become your greatest weapon. You would be able to perceive things no Sharingan or Byakugan ever could. She looked at him, her eyes shining with the thrill of a new, impossible gamble. But the secret still remains. You cannot walk around with your eyes closed. People must believe you can still see. She held out her hand, a soft green chakra coalescing in her palm. Then we will make them believe. She touched a single finger to Naruto's forehead. I will apply a permanent, low-level genjutsu to your eyes. It will be tied to your own chakra network. To the outside world, your eyes will appear perfectly normal. Blue, clear, and focused. If you need to, you will even be able to make them appear as a standard 3 Tomoe Sharingan. A simple illusion, but one that will maintain the legend. The plan was set. A secret kept by three. For the next 2 weeks, while the world trembled at the legend of Konoha's golden god, the boy behind the legend was in a secluded Uchiha training ground, learning to see again. It was agony. He sat with his eyes closed, a blindfold wrapped around his head for good measure, trying to master the trickle of nature energy. At first, the sensory input was a chaotic, nauseating storm. He felt the buzzing of every insect for a mile, the rustle of every leaf, the flow of water deep underground. It was a cacophony that threatened to tear his mind apart. But slowly, painstakingly, with the help of his clones, he began to filter it. He learned to separate the background noise from the points of focus. He learned to feel the shape of a tree not by its color, but by the life force flowing within it. He learned to track the path of a thrown kunai not by the glint of its steel, but by the whisper of its passage through the air. On the final day, he stood in the center of the training ground, his blindfold on, his breathing even. Fugaku stood 100 yards away. Without a word, his father threw a single, unaimed shuriken into the dense forest behind Naruto. Naruto didn't turn. He just held out his hand. The shuriken, which had ricocheted off 2 trees and a rock, flew out of the woods on a wild, unpredictable trajectory. Naruto's hand moved with a calm, impossible grace and plucked it from the air. He took off the blindfold. His eyes, under Tsunade's permanent illusion, were a clear, vibrant blue. But he wasn't seeing with them. In his mind, he held a perfect, three-dimensional, 360-degree map of the entire forest for 5 miles in every direction, rendered in the flawless detail of life energy and ambient chakra. He could feel the heartbeat of a rabbit in its burrow a mile to the north. He could feel the exact number of leaves on the branch Fugaku was standing under. His vision wasn't just restored. It had evolved. He was no longer just Naruto Uchiha, the Jinchuriki, the wielder of the Mangekyo. He was the sage who could see the entire world with his eyes closed. The 2 weeks of Naruto's secret, torturous training passed in a blur of focused silence. To the village, their hero was resting and recuperating. In reality, he was being reborn in the dark, forging a new sense of self from the ashes of his sight. While Naruto learned to navigate his new world of sensory input, Tsunade moved to solidify their hard-won peace. The war was over, but the treaties were yet to be signed. She stood in the Hokage's office, a grand map of the elemental nations spread across her desk. Before her stood her most trusted advisors, Jiraiya, his usual wanderlust tempered by the gravity of the situation, and Fugaku Uchiha, his presence a silent, intimidating pillar of strength. The reports are confirmed, Tsunade said, her voice sharp and clear. Kumo and Iwa have fully withdrawn to their borders. They're licking their wounds. Our propaganda blitz worked. They're terrified. Fear is a temporary deterrent, Fugaku stated, his voice a low rumble. When they realize the true cost of our victory, when they discover Naruto's condition, they will see it not as a strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. Which is why we don't give them time to think, Jiraiya added, a cunning glint in his eye. We have them on the back foot. We press our advantage now, while their morale is shattered. Tsunade slammed her hand on the map, a gesture of absolute authority. Exactly. I am calling for an emergency cage summit. The location will be neutral territory, the land of iron. I have already sent the summons. Aniki and A will attend. If they refuse, it is an open declaration of their intent to resume hostilities, and the world will see them as the aggressors. She looked at the two men, her expression a mask of cold, hard strategy. This will not be a negotiation between equals. This is a victor's parley. We will dictate the terms of this peace, and they will accept them. Fugaku's eyebrow rose slightly. And what are our terms? First, Tsunade said, holding up a finger, the Jinchuriki. They are the ultimate strategic assets, and Kumo and Iwa were reckless with theirs. As reparations for their unprovoked aggression, their captured Jinchuriki will remain in our custody. Yugito Ni will remain a prisoner of Konoha. Roshi will be handed over to our allies in Tsunagure as a show of faith and to balance the power in the region. Jiraiya let out a low whistle. It was an audacious demand, a permanent shift in the global balance of power. Second, Tsunade continued, financial reparations. They will pay for the reconstruction of every village and outpost their armies damaged. Both in the land of fire and the land of wind. And finally, she said, her gaze hardening, a binding, continent-wide non-aggression pact, to be overseen by the fire daimyo and the samurai of the land of iron. An attack on any signatory nation will be met with the combined force of all others. We are not just ending a war, we are forging a new era of enforced peace. The plan was bold, aggressive, and brilliant. It used their victory not to conquer, but to create a new world order with Konoha and its allies at the center. The council will agree, Fugaku stated with certainty. And the daimyo will support it. Good, Tsunade said. Now get out. I need to prepare the diplomatic briefs. Jiraiya grinned and vanished in a swirl of leaves, off to spread the news and enjoy the political chaos. Fugaku, however, did not move. He waited until the door was closed, the silence of the office settling around them. There is another matter, Hokage-sama, he said, his voice dropping. Tsunade looked at him, her expression softening from cage to colleague. How is he progressing? Beyond all expectation, Fugaku admitted, a note of awe in his voice. His control over the passive nature energy is uncanny. He has already surpassed simple sensory perception. He can discern chakra signatures from miles away, differentiate individuals by their life force. It is as you said. His blindness has become his greatest weapon. He paused, the next word seeming to carry an immense weight. His progress is remarkable. It brings up the other matter. He met her gaze, his own dark eyes filled with a heavy, secret knowledge. Should we give it to him now? Tsunade leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepling as she stared up at the ceiling. She understood immediately. The ultimate failsafe. The final gift of a father to his son. It was the logical next step, the ultimate solution to the problem of the Mangekyo's curse. But Naruto had just found his own solution. He had overcome a debilitating weakness and forged it into an even greater strength, entirely on his own terms. To present him with another path now. A slow, wry smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a gambler who decides to let a winning streak ride. "Nah," she said, her voice laced with a surprising, almost maternal fondness. "Let the kid enjoy it for a little bit. Let him have his victory." Fugaku considered her words, and for the first time in a long time, the rigid posture of the Uchiha clan had relaxed. He gave a single, consenting nod. He understood. It was an act of kindness in a world that had shown his son so little. He bowed and left the office, walking back to the compound where his son was busy mastering a power no one in the world knew he possessed. He walked past the Naka shrine, his thoughts drifting to a hidden vault deep beneath it, a place known only to him. A vault where, preserved in a scroll sealed with the most powerful preservation jutsu the Uchiha possessed, rested the clear, brilliant blue eyes of Minato Namikaze, waiting for the day their true heir might need them. The land of iron was a world of white and gray. Snow-dusted mountains clawed at a perpetually overcast sky, and the air was so cold and thin it was like breathing razors. In the center of this desolate landscape stood the three wolves, the three great peaks that housed the neutral nation's heart, a fortress of steel and samurai tradition. The cage summit was held in a vast, circular chamber, its walls unadorned stone, its only furniture a massive, round table of polished black iron. The atmosphere was colder than the mountain air outside. The Konoha delegation was a silent, intimidating force. Tsunade sat at the table, flanked by Jiraiya and Fugaku, her expression a mask of bored impatience. Behind her stood Naruto, his eyes, under their permanent genjutsu, clear and calm. He wasn't looking at the other cage, his new senses were drinking in the emotional landscape of the room. He felt the furious, impotent rage radiating from the Reikage, and the cold, calculating fear swirling beneath the Tsuchikage, Anaki's, aged exterior. Gaara of the Sands sat beside them, his presence a quiet, unshakable pillar of support for the new alliance. At the head of the table, the general of the Land of Iron, a stoic, scar-faced man named Mifune, called the summit to order. "We are gathered here today to forge a peace," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "The alternative is a war that will consume us all. Hokage-sama, you have called this summit. You have the floor." Tsunade didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out her terms, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a victor. The transfer of the Jinchuriki, the financial reparations, the binding non-aggression pact. Each demand was a hammer blow against the already shattered pride of the two defeated cage. As expected, the room exploded. "Outrageous," A roared, slamming his one remaining fist on the iron table with enough force to make it groan in protest. "You cripple my village, defeat my brother, and you have the audacity to demand tribute? Kumagakure does not bow to threats. The Hokage speaks the language of a conqueror, not a peacemaker," Anaki added, his voice a raspy sneer. "You hold our shinobi hostage and call it reparations. These terms are an insult. Iwagakure will never accept them." Tsunade just smirked, a dangerous, predatory glint in her eyes. "They are not threats, Reikage. They are consequences. And they are not negotiable." The argument devolved from there, a predictable storm of angry posturing and political maneuvering. Naruto remained silent, a calm island in the tempest. He felt the rise and fall of their chakra, the subtle tells of their emotions. Ai's rage was a roaring, uncontrolled bonfire. Anaki's was a cold, hidden furnace. Both were masks for the same thing, a deep, profound fear of the boy standing behind the Hokage's chair. Finally, as A rose to his feet, his chakra flaring, ready to overturn the table and end the summit in violence, Naruto spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rage with the clean, quiet authority of a drawn sword. "Sit down, Reikage-sama." A froze, his furious gaze snapping to Naruto. "What did you say, you insolent brat?" "I said, sit down," Naruto repeated, his voice still calm, his illusory blue eyes holding the Reikage's gaze without a flicker of fear. "Your anger is loud. It's boring." He turned his gaze to the floating Tsuchikage. "As is your fear, Lord Anaki. It smells of dust and regret. You are both acting like children who have lost a game. This isn't a game." He took a single step forward, and the pressure in the room shifted. "You talk of threats and insults. Let me be clear." He vanished. It wasn't a blur of motion. It wasn't a flicker of golden light. One moment he was standing behind Tsunade's chair, The next he was standing between the Reikage and the Tsuchikage, a hand resting gently on each of their shoulders. Neither cage had felt him move. Their elite bodyguards, standing against the walls, hadn't even registered a flicker of chakra. The room held its breath. The propaganda you saw was a highlight reel. Naruto's voice was a soft, chilling whisper that only the two cage could hear. A warning. If you force our hand, if you continue this war, I will not send a clone. I will not summon a fox. I will come myself. And I will not capture your Jinchuriki. I will end your villages. That is not a threat. It is a promise. He squeezed their shoulders, a gesture that was both a comfort and a terrifying vow. Then, just as silently, he was back in his original position, his arms crossed, his expression serene. Slowly, shakily, sank back into his chair, his face pale, the rage in his eyes extinguished and replaced by a cold, horrified understanding. Anaki's back, for the first time in 50 years, seemed to shrink, the wizened old man looking every bit his age. Mifune, the samurai general, who had witnessed the entire exchange with a warrior's stoic calm, finally spoke into the stunned silence. It seems the terms presented by the Hokage, he said, his gaze sweeping over the two defeated leaders, are not only reasonable but generous. He looked at then at Anaki. Do you accept? There was a long, heavy pause. Then, with the weight of their villages on their shoulders, the two most powerful men in their nations gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The war was officially over. The two quiet nods of assent were not a victory cheer, they were the sound of a world shifting on its axis. The war was over, won not by armies, but by a single, terrifying display of power. Mifune, the samurai general, stood, his presence commanding the room back to a state of formal procedure. The terms are agreed upon. The treaties will be drawn up. It was then that Tsunade showed she was more than just the wielder of Konoha's biggest stick, she was a master of politics. The full terms of this agreement, including the transfer of Jinchuriki and the financial reparations, will be classified at the highest level, known only to those in this room, she declared, her voice firm. To the world, we will present a simpler narrative. She looked at and Anaki, not with triumph, but with the shrewd gaze of a fellow leader. The official announcement will state that in light of a greater, emerging threat to our world, the villages of Konoha, Suna, Kumo, and Iwa have agreed to an immediate cessation of hostilities and have entered into a continent-wide non-aggression pact to ensure mutual security. We will allow you to save face. We will give you a peace you can sell to your people without appearing weak. Her expression hardened. But you and I will know the truth. You will know the price of breaking this peace. Do we have an understanding? It was a masterful move, an act of political grace that was, in its own way, more intimidating than any threat. She wasn't just defeating them, she was showing them how to govern. And Anaki, their pride already shattered, could only give another, deeper nod of assent. They had been utterly and completely outplayed on every conceivable level. In a dark, dripping cavern deep in the land of rain, the world was a different kind of gray. Ethereal, shimmering figures stood in a circle, their forms distorted by the projection jutsu. These were the Akatsuki. The war is over. The voice of their leader, Pain, was a flat, emotionless monotone that echoed in the cavern. Iwagakure and Kumagakure have surrendered. An unconditional peace treaty has been signed. A derisive snort came from the hulking, plant-like figure of Zetsu. Unconditional? That's not what the news says. The official story is a friendly little alliance. The official story is a lie, Pain stated. Konoha's 9 tails was deployed. He single-handedly defeated the Jinchuriki of the 2 tails and the 8 tails, captured the former, and forced the 4th Reikage into a full retreat. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief and reassessment. So the little brat finally showed his true colors, Datara's voice was laced with artistic jealousy. A battle that ends a war in a single day. That is the ultimate art. An explosion of power that changes the world. It's beautiful. It is an inconvenience, Sasori's gravelly, puppet-like voice retorted. Our plan was to acquire the Baijuu in order, from weakest to strongest. This changes the hierarchy. The 9 tails is no longer a final target. He is a king on the board. Kisame Hoshigaki let out a low, rumbling chuckle, his shark-like features twisting into a hungry grin. He took down Bisama? And Yugito? My. It seems the little fish has grown into a whale. I'm looking forward to seeing how he measures up to Seimata. Throughout the discussion, one figure remained perfectly still, a silent phantom in a red clouded cloak. Itachi Uchiha listened, his face an unreadable mask. Internally, his mind was a storm. Naruto. You have become this strong? It was a surge of fierce, undeniable pride, immediately followed by a cold, sickening dread. He had created a monster to protect his home, and in doing so, he had painted a target on his little brother so large it could be seen from the moon. The world would not rest until it had him. And this organization, his supposed allies, would be the first to try. Our timeline must be accelerated. Pain's voice cut through the murmurs, his Rinnegan eyes holding a cold, new light. The balance of power has shifted. Konoha is no longer a sleeping giant, it is awake, and its greatest weapon is active. The capture of the Nine Tails is now our primary objective. All other plans are secondary. He looked at each of the shimmering figures. He is a perfect Jinchuriki who wields the power of the fourth Hokage and the Uchiha. Do not underestimate him. He is the single greatest obstacle to our peace. Deep within a subterranean lair, the air smelled of chemicals and ambition. Orochimaru watched the events of the summit play out on a stolen crystal ball, a long, reptilian tongue flickering out to taste the air. He did not look angry. He looked utterly, completely delighted. Kukaku. Oh, Tsunade, you old gambler, he hissed to himself. You bet everything on one boy, and he won you the world. The Sanin's fascination was not with the political outcome, but with the specimen at its center. A Jinchuriki with that level of control, with a Mangekyo, with the Hiraishin. Naruto Uchiha was no longer just a potential asset, he was a work of art. A perfect fusion of powers that Orochimaru craved with every fiber of his being. The door to his lab slid open, and Sasuke Uchiha entered. He was taller, his features sharper, and he moved with a silent, lethal grace. He had just finished a grueling training session, his body still humming with the power of the curse mark he was learning to control. The war is over, Orochimaru said, not looking away from the crystal ball. Your brother won it for them. Sasuke's expression didn't change, but his fists clenched at his sides. He had heard the whispers from Orochimaru's spies. The stories of Naruto's godlike power, of the armored Kurama, of a battle that had humbled 2Kage. He was on a secret mission for Konoha, a mission that required him to steep himself in this snake's darkness to get strong enough to protect the village from the shadows. And while he was here, learning to control a cursed power, Naruto was out in the light, becoming a living legend. The victory was Konoha's. But the glory was Naruto's. The gap between them was no longer a rivalry to be overcome, it was a chasm, a different plane of existence. The thought did not break him. It forged his resolve into something harder, colder, and sharper than any blade. Show me the next stage of the curse marks training, Sasuke said, his voice a low, determined command. I am not strong enough. Not yet. Orochimaru's lips curled into a predatory smile. He had his perfect vessel, hungry and driven. And the world had a new god, waiting to be studied. The 2 years that followed the summit were a period the history books would later call the unsettled peace. The continent was quiet, the looming threat of Konoha's golden god a more effective deterrent than any treaty. But beneath the calm, the world was changing, the players on the great board moving their pieces in the shadows. In Konoha, life returned to a new kind of normal. The village was rebuilt, stronger than before, and trade flourished. At the center of it all was Naruto Uchiha. He was no longer just a shinobi, he was an icon, a living symbol of the village's indomitable will. He was promoted to Jonin at the age of 18, a decision met with unanimous, enthusiastic approval from the council. His public persona was one of calm, confident strength. He would walk the village streets, his illusory blue eyes greeting villagers with a warm smile, a pillar of reassurance. But his reality was a secret, silent world. He stood in the center of Uchiha Training Ground 7, a black blindfold tied securely over his eyes. Opposite him stood Kakashi and his father, Fugaku. Ready? Kakashi asked, his voice deceptively casual. Naruto didn't answer. He just settled into a low stance, his breathing even. In his mind, the world was a perfect, 360-degree map of life and chakra. He could feel the rustle of Kakashi's jacket, the faint thrum of Fugaku's chakra, the individual blades of grass swaying in the breeze 500 yards away. They moved simultaneously. Fugaku unleashed a massive great fireball jutsu, a roaring inferno that scorched the air. At the same time, Kakashi blurred through hand signs, sending a crackling bolt of lightning, a true Chidori, streaking towards Naruto's blind spot. Naruto didn't dodge. He flowed. He used the Hiraishin to flash behind his father, the two cataclysmic jutsus colliding where he had stood a second before in a deafening explosion of steam and thunder. Before the smoke even cleared, Naruto was already moving, appearing beside Kakashi and landing a precise, open palm strike to the Jonin's side that made him grunt in surprise. Match, Naruto said quietly. Fugaku emerged from the smoke, a rare, proud smile on his face. Kakashi just shook his head in disbelief. It's still unnerving, you know, the copy ninja said. Fighting a kid who sees better with a blindfold on than I do with my Sharingan. Naruto pulled off the blindfold. It's getting easier. The noise is quieter now. His passive sage sense had become a part of him. He no longer felt the world, he perceived it. But with that power came a quiet, heavy isolation. He was a hero who could no longer see the smiles of the people he protected. In a dark, subterranean arena lit by eerie green torches, the sound of battle was a symphony of agony and power. Sasuke Uchiha was a blur of black and purple energy, the second state of his curse mark twisting his features into a demonic visage. He moved with a speed that rivaled the Raikages, his Chidori now a black, crackling spear of malevolent lightning. His opponents, 100 of Orochimaru's prisoners condemned to be his sparring partners, were not even a challenge. He flowed through them, a whirlwind of death, his attacks precise, brutal, and utterly final. He felt nothing for them. They were simply tools to sharpen his fangs. When the last body fell, he stood panting in the center of the carnage, the curse mark receding, leaving him pale and slick with sweat. Excellent, Sasuke-kun, Orochimaru's voice hissed from the shadows. Your mastery of the curse mark is nearly complete. You have surpassed even my expectations. Sasuke just glared at the Sannin, his 3 Tomoe Sharingan spinning. It's not enough. I'm still too slow. He's still stronger. He didn't need to say the name. They both knew who he meant. Orochimaru's lips curled into a delighted, predatory smile. The rivalry, the obsession. It was the perfect fuel. High above the windswept dunes of the Land of Wind, a strange, white clay bird soared on the desert thermals. On its back sat 2 figures in red clouded cloaks. Are we there yet, Deidara asked, his voice filled with an artist's impatience. This endless sand is an insult to the eyes. From within a hulking, scorpion-like puppet, Sasori's voice rasped, devoid of all emotion. Patience, Deidara. The target is just ahead. The Nine Tails has proven too formidable for now. We will return to the original plan. We will start with the weakest. Deidara visible eye lit up with a manic glee. The capture of the One Tail will be my greatest masterpiece. In the Hokage's office, the peace was shattered. A Suna messenger bird, exhausted and half dead, had arrived, a scroll clutched in its talons. Tsunade read the message, her face hardening into a mask of cold fury. She looked at the Jonin commander on duty. Sound the alarm, she commanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Send a message to the Uchiha compound. Find Naruto. Tell him his friend is in trouble. The scroll contained a single, frantic message. The Akatsuki are here. The Kazekage has been taken. The Jonin commander didn't even have time to acknowledge the Hokage's order. The moment the words "his friend is in trouble" left Tsunade's lips, the air in the office crackled. Naruto, who had been in the Uchiha compound miles away, was simply there. He appeared in a silent, golden flash beside Tsunade's desk, his hand resting on a Hiraishin marker he had left there years ago. He wasn't wearing his Jonin flak jacket or his white coat. He wore a simple black shirt and pants, the attire of a shinobi ready for a serious fight. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. Fugaku and Kakashi, who had been summoned the moment the news broke, were already in the office. They weren't surprised by his appearance, they expected it. The Akatsuki? Naruto's voice was a low growl. Tsunade pushed the Suna scroll across her desk. Deidara and Sasori. They took him from the village in broad daylight. Baki has a team in pursuit, but they're too slow, Naruto finished, his gaze already distant. He closed his eyes, his passive sage sense flaring, stretching out across the continent, searching for a familiar chakra signature. He found it. Faint, fading, but there. He also found 2 others, alien and malevolent, moving away from it at high speed. He had his heading. I'm going now, he stated. A team is being assembled, Fugaku started, but Naruto cut him off. There's no time, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked at his father. This isn't a mission for an army. It's a recovery. I'm the only one fast enough. He placed a hand on another Hiraishin marker, the one connected to the Kazekage's office in Sunagakure. I'll get him back. With a final, brilliant flash of gold, he was gone, leaving the 3 most powerful shinobi in Konoha standing in his wake. The Kazekage's office in Sunagakure was a scene of frantic despair. Baki was barking orders, trying to coordinate a pursuit that he knew was likely hopeless. Tamari stood by the window, her knuckles white as she gripped her fan, her eyes scanning the empty desert with a desperate, furious helplessness. A golden light filled the room. Naruto stood in the center of the office, his presence so sudden and overwhelming that the entire room fell silent. Tamari gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Naruto. Which way? His voice was cold steel. She pointed, her hand trembling slightly. Northeast. Towards the river that borders the land of fire. Kankuro was injured trying to stop them. He was poisoned. Naruto's jaw tightened. He walked over to her, his movements calm and deliberate. He'll be fine. I'll get Sakura later, she's the best there is. I'll bring your brother home. He gave her a look of absolute, unshakable certainty. Then, he closed his eyes. The red pigmentation of Fox Sage Mode flowed over his eyelids like fresh war paint. The wild, untamed energy of the world rushed into him, a familiar, powerful embrace. He didn't just feel the Akatsuki's direction anymore, he saw their path, a trail of malevolent chakra staining the desert sands. He walked to the large open window, looked out at the vast, empty desert, and simply stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. He vanished, a golden streak disappearing over the horizon, moving at a speed that defied physics. High above the desert, Datara laughed, his clay bird soaring through the clouds. This is too easy, The great Kazekage, captured without a single masterpiece. It's almost disappointing. Inside a large, clay orb held in the bird's talons, Gaara was unconscious, the Akatsuki's jutsu suppressing his Baijuu. Sasori, from his position on the bird's back, was silent, his puppet eyes scanning their back trail. Do not get complacent, Datara. The Ninetales is allied with this village. He will come. Let him come. Datara cackled. My art is the pinnacle of beauty. My explosions will light up the sky. He is no match for a true artist, yeah. Is that so? The voice came from directly between them. The two S-rank criminals froze. They turned their heads slowly. Naruto was standing casually on the back of their clay bird as it flew hundreds of feet in the air, his arms crossed, his sage-marked eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. He hadn't flown, he had simply used the Hiraishin, marking the bird itself in the split second he had shot past it. Datara artistic glee vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. Impossible. How did you? He didn't get to finish. Naruto moved, his speed a thing of myth. He appeared before Datara, his hand, already wreathed in the silver claws of a sage, plunging into the artist's chest. Datara's eyes went wide, a look of profound, artistic offense on his face before his life was extinguished. It was not a battle, it was an execution. One down, Naruto said quietly. He pulled his hand free and turned his cold gaze to Sasori. The puppet master had already reacted, the back of the clay bird exploding as Sasori leapt clear, his main body, the puppet Hiruko, landing on a rocky outcropping below. You will regret that, brat, Sasori's voice rasped from within the puppet. A volley of 1,000 poisoned senbon shot from Hiruko's mouth. Naruto simply held up a hand. A swirling vortex of wind, a miniature Rasen shuriken, formed in his palm and shredded the poisoned needles into dust. He leapt from the now crashing clay bird, grabbing the orb containing Gaara and landing softly on the ground opposite the puppet master. My friend is not your art project, Naruto growled. What followed was a slaughter. Hiruko's scorpion tail, Sasori's greatest defense, was shattered by a single, sage-enhanced punch. The third Kazekage puppet, Sasori's masterpiece, was met with a full-sized Rasengan that obliterated the iron sand and tore the puppet to shreds. Finally, Sasori revealed his true form, a grotesque puppet body of his own design. He unleashed his final technique, the 100 puppets. An army of deadly marionettes swarmed Naruto. Naruto didn't even bother with clones. He just moved. He was a golden phantom in a sea of wood and steel, his sage claws rending, his Hiraishin flashes a constant, disorienting presence. The 100 puppets were reduced to a pile of splintered tinder in less than a minute. He stood before the exposed, beating core of Sasori's last remaining puppet, his hand held an inch from the container. You are a monster, Sasori whispered, his life fading. No, Naruto said, his voice devoid of all emotion as he gently plucked the core from its housing, ending the puppet master's existence. I'm just a shinobi. He stood in the silent, windswept canyon, the wreckage of the Akatsuki's finest artists at his feet. He walked over to their bodies, his sage sense feeling for the unique chakra signature of their rings. He slipped the ring from Datara's finger and the one from Sasori's true thumb, pocketing them without a second glance. He turned to the clay orb and, with a precise application of chakra, shattered it, revealing Gaara's unconscious form. He gently lifted his friend, slinging him over his shoulder. He closed his eyes, found the Hiraishin marker in Suna, and with a final, silent flash of gold. The golden light resolved into the familiar baked clay of the Kazekage's office. The sand shinobi who had been in a state of frantic despair a moment ago now stared in stunned, reverent silence. Naruto stood in the center of the room, the unconscious form of their Kazekage held securely over his shoulder. He gently laid Gaara down on a nearby divan, his movements careful and steady. Temari was the first to find her voice, a choked, disbelieving whisper. He's. You. How? They weren't as tough as they thought, Naruto said simply, the last traces of his sage mode fading, leaving him looking tired but resolute. His gaze swept the room and landed on Baki. Their extraction ritual was interrupted. Gaara should be fine, but he'll be weak for a while. He then looked at Temari, his expression hardening with a sudden recollection. Kankuro. You said he was poisoned. Temari's face paled, the joy of her brother's return instantly replaced by renewed worry. Yes, Sasori's poison is legendary. Our medics are doing what they can, but it's not enough, Naruto finished for her. He walked to the center of the room, his fatigue forgotten. Don't worry. I know the best medical nin in the world. I'll be right back. Before anyone could ask what he meant, he placed a hand on a Hiraishin marker he kept sealed in his pouch, the one connected to Tsunade's office. With another brilliant flash, he was gone. In Konoha's hospital, Sakura Haruno was diligently working, her hands glowing with green chakra as she healed a Jonin's injuries. She had grown into a formidable medic, her skills second only to her master's. A golden light filled the room, and suddenly, Naruto was standing beside her. Sakura-chan, I need to borrow you, he said, his tone urgent but calm. Sakura didn't even flinch. 3 years of being on a team with Naruto had prepared her for this level of absurdity. What is it? Where? Suna. Kankuro's been poisoned by an Akatsuki puppet master. No time to explain. He held out a hand. Grab your kit. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her medical pack, took his hand, and the world dissolved into a golden blur. They reappeared in the Suna medical bay less than a minute after he had left. The sand medic stared in utter shock as Naruto and a pink-haired girl appeared from thin air. Get her to Kankuro, now, Naruto commanded, and the sand nin, already in awe of him, scrambled to obey. Sakura was a whirlwind of professional efficiency, identifying the complex poison and immediately beginning the painstaking extraction process. With Kankuro in capable hands, Naruto went to check on Gaara. He found him awake, sitting up in his bed, with Temari at his side. The Kazekage looked weak, but his teal eyes were clear and filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. You saved me, Gaara said, his voice a soft rasp. That's what friends are for, Naruto replied with a small smile. He saw Temari watching him, a complex mixture of relief, awe, and something else he couldn't quite place in her eyes. I'll leave you two to talk. He stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him. As he leaned against the wall, the full weight of the day finally hitting him, he saw Temari emerge a moment later, a thoughtful expression on her face. He decided there was no better time than the present. So, he began, a tired but roguish grin spreading across his face. A promise is a promise. I'd say I've more than earned that date by now, wouldn't you? Temari's head snapped towards him, her cheeks instantly flushing a brilliant shade of pink. You. We. My brother was just kidnapped, she stammered, completely flustered. I was going to ask if you would stay the night. So we could go out. Before Naruto could reply, Gaara's voice, quiet but clear, came from inside the room. Temari, a word. She gave Naruto a final, panicked look before composing herself and slipping back into the room. Gaara looked at his sister, his expression completely serious. I heard that. Gaara, Normally, Gaara interrupted, his voice a flat, analytical monotone, this is the part where, as your younger brother in your cage, I would give you the whole spiel. I would warn you to be careful, to not let him take advantage of you, to protect your honor. He paused, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. But honestly, with all he's done for us, he's kind of earned that right too, if you allow it of course. Silence. Temari's brain took a moment to process the statement. When it did, her face went from pink to a shade of crimson that would make a fire hydrant jealous. Gaara. Smack. She delivered a light, but very pointed, smack to the back of her brother's head before turning on her heel, huffing, and stomping out of the room, her face a storm of indignation and embarrassment. Naruto, who had been leaning against the wall, saw her storm past him in a huff. He blinked, completely bewildered. He peeked his head back into the room. Gaara was sitting there, rubbing the back of his head, but for the first time in his life, he was openly chuckling, a soft, breathy, genuine sound of amusement. Everything all right? Naruto asked, confused. Gaara looked up at him, his teal eyes twinkling. All is well, Naruto. All is well. Gaara's soft, genuine chuckle was a sound so rare it felt like a historic event. Naruto, peeking his head back into the room, could only blink in confusion at the sight. The Kazekage, the stoic, unshakable leader of Suna, was laughing. What's so funny? Naruto asked, stepping back into the room. Nothing, Naruto, Gaara said, his smile still lingering. Just an internal Sand Village matter. He looked towards the door his sister had just stormed through. I believe she will be waiting for you. A slow grin spread across Naruto's face as understanding dawned. He gave the Kazekage a mock salute. Wish me luck. He found Temari a short distance down the corridor, leaning against a large window overlooking the moonlit desert, her arms crossed, her face still a delightful shade of crimson. She was trying very hard to look intimidating and failing spectacularly. So, Naruto said, leaning against the wall beside her. Your brother's a jerk. The worst, she agreed, though the anger in her voice was gone, replaced by a soft, flustered sigh. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the endless sea of sand outside. Thank you, by the way. For everything. For Gaara. For Kankuro. All in a day's work for Konoha's golden god, he said with a theatrical flourish. She finally looked at him, and a small, reluctant smile broke through her composure. You're an idiot, she said. Yeah, but I'm your idiot. For tonight, at least, he replied, his voice softening. Come on. I'm starving. Let's go find the best food this village has to offer. My treat. He held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. The village of Sunagakure by night was a different world. The oppressive heat of the day had given way to a cool, refreshing breeze that whispered through the cavernous streets. Paper lanterns cast a warm, golden glow, and the sounds of life, music from a hidden tavern, the laughter of children playing after dusk, filled the air. Naruto, using his sage senses, navigated the labyrinthine village with an ease that surprised Temari, leading them to a small, secluded rooftop restaurant with a stunning view of the three desert moons. She had changed out of her combat gear into a simple, elegant black yukata, and Naruto found that his passive senses, which painted a perfect picture of her form and the flow of her chakra, were almost a distraction. The initial awkwardness melted away as they talked. He asked about her giant fan, and she explained the intricacies of her wind-scythe dance with the passion of a true master. She asked about his white coat, and he told her the story of his battle with the raikage, not as a boast, but as a quiet, somber recounting of a duty performed. It must be heavy, she said, her voice soft as she looked at him across the table. That title. The responsibility. Naruto shrugged, swirling the tea in his cup. It is what it is. My father was the fourth Hokage. My other father is the head of the Uchiha. I was never going to have a normal life. He looked up, and though his genjutsu-covered eyes were a perfect, clear blue, his focus seemed to be on something far away. It's better than the alternative. Better than being seen as a monster. She heard the faint echo of Gaara's old pain in his words and understood. This boy, this living legend, was carrying a weight she couldn't even imagine. After dinner, they walked. The streets were quieter now, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone. I have to admit, she said, breaking the comfortable silence. When we first met, during the Chunin exams, I never would have expected this. Expected what? He asked. You, she said simply. I thought you were just a loud, arrogant brat with a famous name. Hey. I was charming, he protested with a grin. You were infuriating, she corrected, a smile in her own voice. But you were also kind. The way you spoke to Gaara. No one had ever done that before. She stopped, turning to face him in the pale moonlight. You didn't just save his life today, Naruto. You saved his soul a long time ago. I never properly thanked you for that. You don't have to, he said, his voice quiet. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. Want to see the best view in the village? Before she could answer, he wrapped an arm around her waist. Hold on tight. With a silent, golden flash, the world dissolved. They reappeared on the highest point of the Kazekage's spire, the wind whipping at their clothes. The entire village was spread out beneath them, a bowl of glittering lights nestled in the heart of an endless, silver desert. The three moons looked close enough to touch. Temari gasped, her hands clutching his shirt, her heart pounding from the exhilarating shock of the teleportation. How? Trade secret, he whispered, his voice close to her ear. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, simply sharing the breathtaking view. The hero of the world and the princess of the desert, two powerful shinobi who had found a rare, quiet moment of peace. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. He just stood with her, his presence a warm, steady anchor in the cool desert night. After a while, he gently took her hand and produced one of his unique, tri-pronged kunai. He pressed it into her palm. "Here," he said softly. "Think of it as a direct line. If you or your brothers ever need me, just channel a little chakra into it. I'll know." She looked from the kunai to his smiling face, and her heart did a slow, dangerous flip. "Is this your idea of giving a girl your number?" "Something like that," he chuckled. The first rays of the desert sun filtered through the window of the guest room, casting a warm, golden stripe across the floor. Naruto woke slowly, the sage sense within him already painting a perfect picture of the room, of the village stirring to life outside, and of the warm, steady presence beside him. He turned his head, his illusory blue eyes falling on Tamari's sleeping form. She was turned away from him, a cascade of her blonde hair spilling across the pillow. With his true sight, the world was a hazy, indistinct blur, but with his senses, she was a masterpiece. He could feel the calm, rhythmic flow of her chakra, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the warmth of her life force. It was a more intimate portrait than his eyes could have ever provided. And yet, a profound, aching sadness settled in his chest. He cursed his mangekyo. He cursed the price of his power. How he wished, in that quiet, peaceful moment, that he could truly see her. That he could see the color of her eyes in the morning light, the small, peaceful smile on her face as she dreamt. He let out a slow, silent sigh of acceptance. This was his reality now. He had made his choice. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he slipped out of the bed and began to get dressed. He and Sakura had to leave. His duty was calling. The mood in the Suna medical bay was triumphant. Kankuro was awake, pale but stable, the last of Sasori's poison having been neutralized by Sakura's expert hand. "I owe you one, Pinky," he rasped from his bed. "You and your crazy teammate." Sakura just smiled, exhausted but proud. Naruto stood with the three San siblings, ready to depart. "Well, our work here is done," he said. "Sakura, you ready to go?" "Ready," she confirmed, slinging her medical pack over her shoulder. Gaara stepped forward and offered Naruto a formal, respectful bow. "The San will not forget this debt, Naruto. Our villages are more than allies now. We are friends." Naruto grinned. "Damn right we are." He then looked at Tamari, who was clutching the Hiraishin kunai in his hand. He gave her a wink. "Don't be a stranger." With a final wave, he placed a hand on Sakura's shoulder, and with a brilliant, golden flash, they were gone, leaving the San siblings standing in the warm morning sun, their village safe, their family whole, and their future brighter than it had been in a generation. The golden flash deposited them not back in the bustling hospital, but in the quiet solemnity of the Hokage's office. Tsunade was at her desk, a mountain of paperwork before her, but she looked up the instant they appeared, her expression sharp and analytical. "Report," she commanded. Sakura, her posture straight and professional, stepped forward. "Mission successful, Master. Kankuro of the Sand has been fully stabilized. All traces of Sasori's poison have been neutralized. He is expected to make a full recovery." Tsunade's gaze lingered on her apprentice, a flicker of immense pride in her eyes. She then turned to Naruto. "And the Akatsuki? Deidara and Sasori have been eliminated," Naruto stated, his voice flat. He placed two rings on her desk, the jade ring with the kanji for blue and the vermilion ring with the kanji for jewel. "Gaara is safe. The Suna Council extends its gratitude." Tsunade stared at the rings, the tangible proof of his victory. Two of the world's most dangerous S-rank criminals, eliminated in a matter of hours by a single shinobi. The reports from the propaganda films were one thing, seeing the spoils of that victory firsthand was another. "Good work, you two," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, profound respect. "Go home. Rest. You've more than earned it." Sakura bowed and left, but Naruto lingered for a moment. He looked at his Hokage, the woman who had helped him hide his new reality from the world. "The secret is safe," he said quietly. "See that it stays that way," she replied, her tone a gentle warning. He gave a single nod and vanished in another golden flash, leaving Tsunade alone in her office with two small rings that represented a monumental shift in the world's balance of power. Naruto reappeared in the familiar entryway of his home. The house was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the shoji screens. The scent of tea and old wood was a comforting balm to his weary soul. "I'm home." Mikoto appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. The worry that had been etched on her face for days melted away into a wave of pure relief. She pulled him into a hug, her embrace a silent expression of a mother's fear and gratitude. "Welcome home, Naruto," she whispered. Later, he found his father in the study. Fugaku was seated, not with a map, but with a simple cup of tea, as if he had been waiting. He did not ask for a report. He simply watched his son, his dark eyes missing nothing. "The mission was a success," Naruto said, sitting opposite him. "I had no doubt it would be," Fugaku replied, his voice a low rumble. He took a slow sip of his tea, his gaze analytical. He saw the fatigue in Naruto's posture, the slight, almost imperceptible way Naruto's head was tilted, as if he were listening to the world more than seeing it. "How are your eyes?" Fugaku asked, the question direct and unforgiving. Naruto's forced smile faltered. He couldn't lie. Not to him. The genjutsu is holding. No one suspected a thing. "That is not what I asked," Fugaku pressed, his gaze sharpening. "I asked how they are." Naruto let out a long, weary sigh, the facade of the invincible hero crumbling away. "It's worse. After the fight with Kumo, the blurriness was there, but I could still make out details up close. Now." He held up his hand, staring at the hazy, indistinct shape. "Now it's like looking through thick, frosted glass. All the time. The sage sense is the only reason I can function." Fugaku's expression remained unchanged, but his hands, resting on his knees, clenched into tight fists. He had seen the reports. He knew Naruto had used Sage Mode to dispatch the Akatsuki. He had not used the Mangekyo. The degradation of his vision was a passive, continuous process, a curse that was slowly, inexorably, stealing the light. "It is as I feared," Fugaku said, his voice heavy. "The damage was more severe than Tsunade initially predicted. The candle is burning faster than we thought." He stood and walked to a heavily sealed scroll rack in the corner of the room, a place Naruto had never seen him open before. He pressed his thumb to the lock, a flare of chakra causing the intricate seals to unwind. He removed a long, slender scroll box, bound in white cloth. He placed it on the table between them. "This is not a conversation I wanted to have for many more years," Fugaku said, his voice grave. "But we are out of time." He slowly opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, were not scrolls or weapons, but 2 glass vials. And floating within each vial, preserved in a clear, chakra-infused liquid, was an eye. A perfect, clear, brilliant blue eye. Naruto stared, his breath catching in his throat. He recognized the chakra instantly. He had seen them in pictures, in his dreams, in his own reflections in the past. "Your birth father's eyes," Fugaku confirmed, his voice a quiet murmur. "Minato Namikaze's." "But how?" Naruto whispered, his mind reeling. "It is a sacred Uchiha tradition for a fallen clansman with powerful eyes," Fugaku explained. "If they have a living relative, a direct bloodkin, their eyes are to be preserved. It is a failsafe. A final gift. A chance to reclaim the light that was lost." He looked at Naruto, his dark eyes filled with a universe of pain and resolve. "The Mangekyo's curse is blindness. But its cure is to take the eyes of a sibling, a parent, a child. An exchange of light. It is what awakens the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan." He gestured to the vials. "You do not have an Uchiha brother to take from. But you have a father's legacy, waiting for you. With ease, and with Tsunade's skill as the world's greatest medical nin, your sight can be restored. Not just restored. It can be made perfect. An eternal light that will never fade." The offer hung in the air, a path to salvation that was both a miracle and a violation. To take his father's eyes, the eyes of the 4th Hokage, and make them his own. "The choice is yours, Naruto," Fugaku said softly. "But know this. The path you walk is a dark one. You will need your light." Miles away, in a cavern of stone and shadow, the ethereal forms of the Akatsuki gathered. Sasori and Datara's spots in the circle were empty. They were defeated. Pain's voice was a cold, flat declaration. Both of them. By the 9 tails, acting alone. The mission to capture the 1 tail was a complete failure. A low chuckle came from Kisame. "It seems the little fish has very sharp teeth." "This is no laughing matter," Kakuzu grumbled. 2 rings, lost. It is an expensive failure. Itachi remained silent, his form a perfect statue. He had felt it, a faint flicker through the Akatsuki network. The death of his comrades. And he knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut like a block of ice, who was responsible. "Naruto. You have become this powerful. And this ruthless." The boy he had set on a path to seek the truth had become an executioner. The thought was a complex, painful mixture of pride and horror. The Nine Tails is no longer a target to be acquired, Pain stated, his Rinnegan glowing in the gloom. He is a threat to be neutralized. All plans will be re-evaluated. Our approach must change. In his own dark sanctuary, Sasuke watched as Orochimaru examined a stack of classified reports, recently stolen from the Konoha Intelligence Division by Kabuto. Such fascinating reading, Orochimaru hissed, a delighted, reptilian smile on his face. The official after-action reports from Suna. Sasori of the Red Sand, a master of 100 puppets, and Datara, the clay bomber. Both erased from the board in a single move. Your brother is truly becoming a force of nature, Sasuke-kun. Sasuke's hand rested on the hilt of his Kusanagi blade, his knuckles white. Every one of Naruto's victories was another stone in the wall between them. He was here, in the dark, preparing for a secret war. But Naruto was out in the light, fighting the real one. And he was winning. The time for training is over, Sasuke said, his voice a low, cold whisper. It is time I started hunting. Alright guys, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. As always, the rest of the story is already out over on Patreon, link to that will be in the description. Anyways, until next time, peace.